Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? It began with a knock, not the thunderous kind that shakes the doorframe or the polite tap of a neighbor needing sugar. No, this knock came like a whisper against the wood, soft, deliberate, and somehow far too knowing. It was 3:03 a.m. And Evelyn Marsh had just woken from a dream where her childhood home was screaming. They say the past stays buried, but that's a lie dressed in comfort. In Evelyn's case, it clawed through dirt and time, and came knocking in the dead of night. She blinked at the ceiling, the dark pressing in like wet cotton. Her phone lay beside her, face down, the screen still warm from a call she'd ended 2 hours earlier. A call she'd made to her sister, Laura, about a letter they received from an estate lawyer in Vermont. Their mother, dead for 7 years, had apparently left behind a second will, and a house, not just any house, Briarcliff, the one they were forbidden to speak of. The knock came again. Evelyn sat up, throat dry, the thin cotton of her tank top clinging to her back. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. Not in the physical sense. There was no shuffle of feet, no shadow crossing her room, but in the way the air had changed, turned still, like a held breath. A memory drifted in. She was 7, maybe 8. In the woods behind their grandmother's property. Digging. Dirt caked under her nails. Her mother's voice sharp in the distance. Don't touch that. Don't ever touch that. She hadn't been touching anything, just digging where the soil was softest. But that night, Evelyn dreamt of hands pulling her underground. Now, years later, a house she didn't remember owning was calling her back. The phone lit up. Unknown number. The screen glowed against the dark as if daring her to answer. She didn't. Instead, she turned it face down again and stood, her bare feet sinking into the carpet like it might hold her there forever if she didn't move quick enough. Outside, the world was still. Too still. Even the street lamp across the road flickered just once, then went black. Her breath fogged the window as she looked out. Nothing. No one. But she could feel something watching. The letter had been precise. You are requested to attend the reading of the revised will of Elaine Marsh, effective immediately upon delivery of this notice. Items of personal and familial significance have been deeded to you and your next of kin. Evelyn didn't even believe in ghosts. She believed in anxiety and trauma, in the kind of memories that rot behind your ribs until you start calling them dreams. But she didn't believe in ghosts. At least, not until that night. The road to Briarcliff was a scar through the Vermont countryside, winding, unlit, and lined with trees that leaned in too close, like they were trying to warn her back. Lara had agreed to come, but last minute she bailed. Claimed a fever. Evelyn didn't press. She understood too well the fear stitched into that name. Briarcliff, the house they were never taken to. The one whispered about when their father drank too much and their mother stared too long into nothing. When she finally pulled into the gravel drive, she saw it. Not a house, a relic. 3 stories of gray stone and splintered wood, its windows like black eyes watching her. A porch sagged forward like it wanted to speak. The door stood ajar, but the air was thick with silence. Not the peaceful kind. This silence was heavy, waiting like it knew her name. She stepped out of the car and the cold wrapped around her like it missed her. The air smelled wrong. Not rot. Worse. Like old metal and something else. Wet soil. No, deeper. Older. Her boots crunched on the gravel, echoing far too loud. The front door creaked on its own. Hello, she called. The house answered with a groan. No one was there. The lawyer's office had promised someone would meet her at noon. It was 12:03. Her phone had no service. As she stepped inside, the floorboards cried beneath her weight. Dust danced in the fractured light leaking through the boarded windows. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of mildew and something she couldn't place. Not until she walked past the staircase and her shoe slid. Blood. Dried. Old. But unmistakable. She backed away instinctively, heart pounding. Then something clicked overhead. Footsteps. No, not footsteps. The sound of movement. Like furniture being dragged, but slower, more deliberate. As if something didn't want to be found, but also didn't want to hide. She swallowed and looked up. The chandelier above the staircase swayed gently. No breeze. Another creak. This time behind her. She turned sharply. Nothing. But then she noticed the photographs. Lining the wall just past the parlor, they were covered in dust and spiderwebs, but one had fallen. It lay cracked on the floor, glass shattered in a starburst. She picked it up. Her mother. Holding a baby. But that wasn't right. She was an only child, wasn't she? The baby had her eyes. Her nose. But she didn't remember any sibling. And her mother looked afraid. Not of the camera, of the house. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she set the frame down. And then she saw it. Behind her mother, just inside the open doorway in the photo, was a figure. Pale, gaunt, almost translucent. Watching. Something scurried in the wall. Fast. Too fast. The kind of fast that doesn't belong to anything with a spine. She backed away and stepped on something. A music box. It clicked open and began to play.
Off key.
Slow, like a lullaby played underwater. The tune was familiar. She didn't know how. But her body did. It froze, muscles locked, heart thudding. And then the voice came. Soft, childlike. Evelyn, you came back. She spun, the box still playing. Nothing. But she had heard it. Not with her ears. It was inside her head. She dropped the box. The music didn't stop. It got louder. The floor vibrated beneath her. The house was waking up. She turned, bolted for the door, and it slammed shut in her face. She hit it hard, pain flashing through her nose. Blood smeared across the wood. The knob wouldn't turn. Behind her, the footsteps came again. Not walking. Running. Straight down the stairs. She didn't look. Couldn't. She ran instead, pushing her shoulder into the side hallway, deeper into the house. Doors blurred past her. The music grew louder, and behind it, something screamed. Not human. Not animal. Something else. Something that remembered. She found the kitchen, tore open the pantry, and wedged herself inside. Darkness swallowed her. The music stopped. For a moment, silence. Then breathing. Not hers. Heavy. Wet. Right outside. Something sniffed at the door. She clamped her hand over her mouth. A whisper, not a voice. A breath. Right at the crack of the door. I know you're here. She didn't move. The floor creaked outside. Silence. More silence. A drag. Like a hand across the door. And then it was gone. She stayed there, heart racing, afraid to even blink. Minutes passed. Then she opened the pantry. The kitchen was empty. Light spilled in through a high window. The clock on the wall was frozen at 3:03. Same as the night before. Her phone, dead. She made her way back to the front door. Tried it again. Still locked. She turned and screamed. A woman stood at the top of the stairs. Long white dress. No eyes. Only dark, weeping holes. And a smile that stretched too wide. You were never supposed to leave, the woman said. Evelyn ran. Back through the hall, up the second staircase, into a room she didn't choose. The door slammed behind her. She was trapped again. Inside the room stood a crib, covered in dust. Inside the crib was a bundle. Not moving. She stepped forward, drawn. Her hands shook as she pulled the cloth aside. Bones. Small. Human. A baby, and carved into the wood of the crib in rough, angry scratches. SHELETHMDIE. The air turned cold, so cold her breath smoked in front of her. The door behind her creaked. The woman's voice again, but it was different now, deeper. Not hers, not human. You can't hide from blood, and Evelyn finally remembered. The boy. The one her mother never let her speak of. The one who died in the house, her twin. She had been there the night he died. She had seen the thing that took him. And now it wanted her too. The room began to shake. The crib tipped over. The house screamed. And Evelyn, eyes wide with terror, realized the house wasn't haunted. It was alive. And it remembered everything, including what she had done. It didn't sound like thunder. Not exactly. It was deeper, more intimate. Like the rumble of something enormous shifting beneath the floorboards. Testing its limbs after a long, forced sleep, Evelyn stood in the middle of the nursery. Her eyes locked on the toppled crib and the cracked bones that had spilled out onto the wooden floor like dice thrown by an angry god. The walls vibrated, picture frames rattling ever so slightly, and from behind her came a groan that sounded far too much like a sigh. The house wasn't just alive, it was listening. She didn't remember running to the far corner of the room, but there she was, pressed against the peeling wallpaper, cold plaster seeping through her shirt. Dust rained down from the ceiling, disturbed by something overhead, a crawlspace, a hidden attic. Her gaze drifted up to the sagging ceiling panel, just above the crib. The air around it pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. Something moved, not loudly, a drag, then another. The sounds of fingers or claws, or both, scraping against wood. Not hurried, not frantic, confident, curious. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She didn't dare inhale. The room had gone cold again. Not winter cold. Grave cold. Cold like the feeling you get when standing in a room where someone died violently. She felt that now, in her bones, in her blood. It was waking up a memory she didn't want to remember. The door behind her opened slowly, without a creak, like it had been pushed by something gentle and deliberate. No one stood in the doorway. The hall beyond stretched into darkness, broken only by faint shafts of dust, filtered light, but she could feel it. The presence waiting just outside, standing motionless, breathing in unison with the house. Then came a sound she hadn't expected: music. The same off-key lullaby from the music box, but this time it was being sung. A child's voice. No, not a child. Her voice, young, sweet, singing the tune with a light hum, barely above a whisper. It echoed from the hall, floating like mist, impossible to locate. It came from everywhere and nowhere. She whispered, "Why do I remember that?" The answer was a flash, not a voice, not words, a feeling. Cold water, wet leaves, the smell of iron, a scream muffled by dirt. She was 5 years old, outside, barefoot, running. Then nothing. A gap in memory so wide it felt like falling. She stepped forward, feet dragging. Something inside her pulling her toward the hallway. Her hands trembled as she crossed the threshold. The house greeted her with a groan, wood bending under invisible weight. She moved down the hall, drawn by the sound of that haunting melody. Each door she passed was slightly ajar, as if waiting to be opened. But she didn't stop. At the end of the hall stood a mirror. Tall, old, framed in flaking gold leaf. She hadn't seen it before, yet it looked familiar. The glass shimmered faintly, like the surface of a lake before something terrible breaks through. She stepped closer. Her reflection was off, not dramatically, just enough to be wrong. It smiled. She didn't. Its head tilted slowly, and the mouth moved. No sound, just movement. The words were clear. "You left him." She staggered back, heart racing. The mirror cracked, just a hairline fracture from top to bottom, but it made the reflection twist. Behind her own image, something shifted. A shape, tall, thin, clad in black. It had no face, only skin stretched where features should have been. She turned. The hallway was empty, but now the walls were breathing. She could hear it, the slow in and out rhythm, like a giant sleeping beast. And worse, the whispering had started. Dozens of voices, layered over one another, some angry, some pleading, some laughing. Evelyn covered her ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't coming from outside. They were behind her eyes. A woman's voice rose above the rest. "Evelyn, don't let it in." Her mother's voice. "But where? Don't open the red door." Her eyes flew open. What red door? The hallway had changed. Somehow longer, twisted. She ran now, full of fear and adrenaline, past door after door, some open, revealing glimpses of impossible things. A child standing in the center of a burning room, unmoving. A man slamming his head into a wall over and over again, face covered in black veins. A woman rocking an empty bundle and weeping blood. She didn't stop until she found it. At the very end, a door, painted a deep, wet red. It pulsed like a wound. She remembered her mother's voice. Don't open the red door. But her hand moved anyway. Not by choice. She gripped the doorknob, cold and slick, as if covered in sweat. The whispers vanished. A silence thicker than anything she'd ever known wrapped around her. And then, a knock from inside the room. 3 knocks, slow, even, like a heartbeat. Then a voice, not hers, not her mother's, but familiar. Evelyn, open it. She didn't want to. She couldn't not. The door opened, and she was no longer in the hallway. She stood on a staircase descending into earth. The walls were mud, roots dangling from the ceiling like veins. The air stank of decay and something sweeter, rot masked by perfume. She stepped down. The red door vanished behind her. The further down she went, the colder it got. Not from temperature, from presence. Something ancient buried, not dead, just waiting. At the bottom of the stairs was a room. Stone walls, one light bulb hanging from a wire, flickering. In the center, a metal table. On it, a small shape wrapped in a white sheet. She stepped closer, pulled it back. Her brother, or what was left of him, face pale, lips blue, eyes open, and then he whispered. I couldn't scream. You buried me. She fell back, hit the wall. Her breath caught in her throat. His body began to twitch. The shadows grew thicker, and behind her something stepped out from the wall. It was her mother, but twisted, eyes gone, mouth stitched shut, and in her arms, another child, a baby, wrapped in thorns, bleeding, crying. Her mother mouthed something, slow in pain. Give him back. Evelyn screamed. The light exploded. Darkness swallowed her whole. And somewhere, far away, the music box played again, off-key, broken, eternal. When Evelyn woke, her mouth tasted like rust. Her fingers scraped against rough stone, nails catching in cracks worn smooth by time or something worse. For a moment, she couldn't see. Only darkness pressed so tightly against her face it felt like cloth. But there was no cloth. Just thick air and a silence so total it made her ears ring. She couldn't remember how she'd gotten here. Only fragments danced behind her eyes, the red door, her brother's body twitching on the table, her mother with the stitched mouth, and that cry, that awful, gurgling cry from the thing wrapped in thorns. And now this. She sat up slowly, bones aching as if she'd been lying still for days. The cold from the stone floor had sunk deep into her back. Her throat was sore. Had she screamed? She didn't remember. She felt along the wall blind until her fingers found something. Wood, splintered and damp. A beam. No, a door frame. She followed its edge, groping through the dark until her hand brushed metal. A doorknob, cold as ice. She twisted. It didn't move. Of course it didn't. That would have been too easy. She pressed her ear against the wood. Nothing at first. Just silence and the steady, thudding beat of her own heartbeat in her skull. But then, there, faint. So quiet she almost convinced herself it was imagined. A scraping. Inside the walls, she pulled away. Another sound now, closer, behind her, breathing, not hers, deep, labored, wet. She turned, heart spiking, but her eyes still hadn't adjusted. She could see nothing, but she felt something. A shift in the air, like someone tall standing too close. Her skin prickled as invisible fingers seemed to reach for her. The breathing stopped. A low whisper slithered across the room. You hear them too now. Her back slammed into the wall as she stumbled. Her hands scrabbled for anything, to throw, to defend, to hold. There was nothing, just the wall and the whispering, now growing louder. A chorus, not one voice, layered. Male, female, old, young, all speaking nonsense. Or maybe not nonsense. Words blurred and twisted together, just out of reach. Then one voice rose above the rest. Her own. You said you'd stay. The whisper echoed off the walls like a mocking chant. She remembered saying that once. She was small, crying under the kitchen table while her mother packed a bag. Her brother had already been missing for 3 days. You said you'd stay. The voices fell silent. The door behind her clicked. Open. She turned, heart pounding in her chest like it was trying to escape. Light, weak, and golden. Just enough to show her the hallway on the other side. Not the one she remembered. This one was lined with wallpaper that peeled like skin. Photos hung tilted on rusted nails. Blurred, burned, warped beyond recognition. The floor was sticky underfoot, and the air hummed with a static that made her fillings buzz. But the worst part, she knew this hallway. She'd never been here before, but every inch of it was burned into her bones, as if she dreamed it every night and just now realized the dreams were real. She stepped into it. The door closed behind her. The photos whispered. She turned to one. It looked like a family gathering. People around a table, hands clasped, but their faces had been scratched out, not with a tool, with fingernails. Deep grooves etched through the paper. Red fingerprints smeared across the frame. Another photo, her mother. Younger, smiling, holding an infant. Not her, someone else. There was a shadow behind them in the frame. Tall, antlered. No, that wasn't possible. She blinked. The photo was gone, replaced with a mirror. Her own face stared back, except it wasn't her face anymore. It was her mother's. Eyes wide, mouth moving, trying to scream. The mirror shattered, and something ran behind her. Fast. Too fast. She didn't chase it. She wasn't that kind of stupid. But the hallway shifted, the lights dimmed, and from the end came a glow soft, flickering. A television. She walked toward it. Every step forward made her skin feel thinner, like the house was peeling her away layer by layer. The whispers returned, this time more insistent. She tried to block them out. Failed. At the end of the hall was a room, the living room. Hers. Not the one from the house, but from her childhood apartment. Same rug, same couch with the cigarette burns. Same TV tray that always wobbled, except it was wrong. The angles were twisted, the walls too tall, the corners too sharp, and the television, it played static at first. Then an image flickered through. A home video, her 5th birthday. She saw herself sitting in front of a cake, paper crown crooked on her head, her brother beside her, not dead, laughing, alive. She stepped closer, trembling, and watched as the tape played out. Their mother smiled, holding the camera. Her father was singing. And then something changed. The colors shifted. The light grew dim. The boy turned to her and whispered something into her ear. She rewound the scene with her mind, watched his lips. Don't let them in. The screen went black. Then the image of her brother, older, appeared. Pale, hollow-eyed, blood trickling from his mouth. You let them in, he said. The TV exploded. The room went dark, and from the corner, a sound. Click, scrape, click, scrape. A figure dragged itself from behind the couch, unfolding, unnatural, all elbows and knees bending wrong. It stood. Its face was a patchwork of features, some hers, some not. It smiled. We remember everything. Evelyn screamed. She turned, bolted from the room, down the hallway that no longer made sense. Doors twisted, opening to walls. Staircases ended in ceilings. The house was folding in on itself. She didn't know where she was running. Only that if she stopped, it would catch her. And she didn't want to know what came next, if it did. She burst through a final door and stumbled into a library. Dust exploded from the shelves. Books spilled like teeth. And at the center of the room, a woman. Sitting, rocking, her mother, alive, staring at nothing, mouth open, eyes blank. And from her throat came a single word, looped endlessly like a broken record. Downstairs, downstairs, downstairs. Evelyn stepped forward. Mom. No reaction, just the rocking, just the word. Downstairs, downstairs, she didn't want to. Every fiber of her screamed no. But her feet were already moving toward the hidden door behind the bookshelf. The one her mother had always said never existed. She opened it and stared into the mouth of the house. A staircase spiraling into black. Something waited below, breathing, hungry. It wasn't over. It had never even started. The door moaned on its hinges, a sound not just heard but felt. like a cold finger dragging along the inside of Evelyn's ribs. The stairs beyond were impossibly narrow, their steps worn into shallow grooves from use, but not recent use. The dust had settled over them thick, like skin on soured milk. Yet she saw something impossible. The dust was split, as if disturbed recently. A trail. Something had walked down, and not come back up. Evelyn stood frozen at the threshold, every instinct clawing at her to slam the door shut, to run, to forget this ever happened, and let the past rot in its grave. But the house didn't give her the luxury of choice. Behind her, the library door groaned shut with a finality that felt less like a closing and more like a sentence being passed. The rocking chair stopped. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her mother's voice was still looping in that flat, dead tone downstairs, as if she'd never stopped saying it. As if she'd been saying it for years. With each step Evelyn took downward, the air thickened. The silence here wasn't just quiet. It was an active force, pressing in on her ears, muffling her thoughts. Her breathing grew shallow. The walls narrowed, bending inward like a throat, and the sound of her boots scuffing the steps echoed strangely. Like it wasn't just bouncing off stone, but being heard. Like something was listening, counting. The light disappeared fast. She used her phone's flashlight, though the battery flickered low. It cast just enough of a glow to show the walls were slick, moist, and pulsing faintly. She touched one out of instinct, and yanked her hand back. The wall was warm, alive. Then came the sound, a soft clicking like nails tapping rhythmically on stone. Far below. Too fast to be human, too slow to be a rat. It wasn't approaching, it was waiting. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat raw, and forced herself to keep going. 10 steps, 20, 30. The air was wet now, her breath coming in ragged gulps as mildew and something more coppery invaded her lungs. And then, without warning, the staircase ended. A narrow passage opened before her, and beyond it, a light. A flickering bulb swung from a wire overhead, revealing a wide chamber carved from stone and root. It was an underground room, but more than that, it felt ritualistic. Symbols etched into the floor had been painted over again and again, layered in different hands, different languages. Some were carved into the walls with fingernails, others burned into wood. And at the center, a crib, not a replica. The crib, the one from the nursery upstairs, exactly as it had looked when she'd first seen it. But that had been broken. This one was whole, pristine. White lace fluttered gently despite the stillness. She stepped closer. There was something inside, a bundle, wrapped in a blanket with blue embroidery along the edges. She knew that stitching. Her grandmother had made that blanket. Her mother had kept it for the child that came after Evelyn, the one that never made it out. She reached out, every fiber of her protesting, her fingers trembling. She pulled back the blanket. There was no body, only a mirror, small, oval, framed in silver. She stared at her reflection, and it changed. Her face melted into her mother's, then her grandmother's, then a blur of faces too fast to recognize, and finally the face of a man, the one from her dreams, the one with no eyes. His mouth moved, no sound. But the words carved themselves into her mind. He's still here. Suddenly the lights above her shattered. Glass rained down in slow motion, and the crib was yanked backward into the dark. She ran toward it, but something slammed into her chest, knocking her back hard against the stone. When she looked up, the figure was there. Tall, thin, wearing the skin of a man, but not a man. Its head was twisted, neck too long, and where eyes should have been were pits of shadow that wreathed with tiny, flickering movements, like insects crawling just beneath the surface. Its hands were wrong. Too many fingers, too many joints, and it was smiling. It stepped toward her. Its voice didn't come from its mouth. It came from the walls. From inside her head. You opened the door. You invited us back. She scrambled to her feet, dizzy with fear. What do you want from me? She gasped. The answer came slow. Truth. Then the walls screamed. Not the house, the walls themselves. Thousands of tiny mouths opened across the stone, shrieking in agony. Faces pressed outward from beneath the surface, their expressions locked in silent howls. Evelyn clutched her head, the sound of stabbing pain behind her eyes. Her nose began to bleed, and then, all at once, silence. When she opened her eyes, the figure was gone, but so was the crib. The mirror lay cracked on the ground, reflecting only darkness. She stumbled backward into a tunnel behind her. It wasn't there before. A new path. The walls here were narrower, the air thicker. The scent of wet soil was stronger, but there was something else now. Burnt hair, flesh, and far ahead, she saw it. A door. Painted black, its surface pulsing like a heartbeat. The sound returned, the lullaby, but this time played backward. A discordant nightmare of a melody. She pressed forward, each step heavier than the last. Her limbs felt slow, weighted. The door opened on its own, and inside was a bedroom. Not underground, not ancient. Hers, her childhood bedroom. The flowered wallpaper. The stuffed animals on the shelves. The tiny shoes neatly lined by the closet. She was 5 again. She knew this place. And lying in the center of the bed, her twin brother. Sleeping, unmoving. She stepped toward him, whispering his name. His eyes opened. Black, not empty, full of something. He smiled. You left me in the ground. Tears stung her eyes. I didn't know, I didn't remember. He sat up slowly. Do you remember now? A flash. Her father digging. Her mother screaming. Blood on the window pane. Hands dragging her back into the house while her brother was outside. A storm. A figure standing in the woods. The sound of crying that stopped too soon. She dropped to her knees. I'm sorry, he reached out to her, touched her face, and whispered too late. The room exploded in light, and Evelyn woke up screaming. She was back in the library. The rocking chair empty, her mother gone. The whisper still echoing faintly down the hallway. Downstairs, downstairs. She was no longer alone, because now the house had her memories too, and it would use every one of them against her. Evelyn stood in the center of the library, frozen, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to hold her bones together. The silence was no longer silence. It was loaded, tense, pregnant with breathless waiting. The floor no longer felt like wood beneath her, but skin, thin and stretched tight, hiding something writhing just beneath. She glanced around, but the room had changed. Subtly, but undeniably. The chandelier above her hung lower, the bookshelves taller, leaning inward like looming monoliths. And in the far corner, where the rocking chair had once been, there was now only a single, narrow door. The kind of door that shouldn't be there. She knew the house was watching. She didn't move. Couldn't. Something about that door tugged at her. Not like curiosity, but compulsion. Like it knew something she didn't. Like it had a secret that belonged to her and only her. She took a step. The floor groaned beneath her, long and low, like a warning, or an invitation. The smell of burnt sugar and spoiled milk filled her nose. Her stomach turned. Another step. The door flickered, literally, like a bad signal on an old TV. 1 second it was there, wood cracked and knob tarnished with rust. The next, gone, replaced by the bookshelf. Then back again. But each time it returned, it was slightly different. The color changed, the size, the number of hinges. It was like the house couldn't decide what memory it wanted to extract from her next. Or maybe the door itself wasn't one door at all, but all of them. Every one she'd ever opened, or slammed, or run from. She reached out, hand trembling. Her fingers grazed the knob. Cold, wet, soft. It pulsed under her hand. She jerked back. It throbbed once more, like it was breathing, then froze. The door stood still. She opened it. What lay beyond was not a room. It was a hallway made entirely of doors. Floor to ceiling. Thousands of them. All shapes and sizes. Some aged with rot and mold, others new and shining. A few too narrow to fit a person through. Some weren't shaped for people at all. She stepped inside. Behind her, the library vanished with a sigh. The hallway blinked under a sickly overhead light that flickered in slow, irregular intervals. Every door she passed had a plaque, some etched in gold, others scrawled in crayon. The names carved into them made her stomach twist. Mom, March 5, 1992, Grandma Ruth, the basement incident, Lara, the red bucket her breath caught when she saw her own name. Over and over. Evelyn Marsh, closet. Age 4, Evelyn Marsh, mirror. Age 8, Evelyn Marsh. The forgotten cry. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. But part of her had to see. Her hand hovered over one doorknob. Splintered wood, the edges burned. It opened before she could touch it. Inside was a room drenched in yellow light, a child's bedroom. Hers. But younger. She saw herself in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, rocking back and forth. There was crying, loud, muffled, not hers. The closet door was shut. Then it opened. A hand reached out, small, pale, fingers twisted unnaturally. The child, Evelyn, didn't look. Didn't move. She just whispered over and over, "He's not gone. He's not gone. He's not gone." The crying stopped. The door slammed shut in her face. Evelyn gasped and stumbled backward into another door. It swung open. A hospital room. Her mother strapped to a bed, face bruised, eyes empty. She kept saying the house was calling. A nurse whispered behind her. Kept asking about the boy. Evelyn stepped forward, and her mother's head snapped toward her. Eyes wide. Bloodshot. "I told you not to let it in," she hissed. "You promised." Then she began to laugh, long, rattling, until her face cracked, not metaphorically, literally. Skin splitting at the seams, leaking black tar like fluid. The door slammed shut, and Evelyn screamed. The hallway pulsed. The lights blinked rapidly now. All the doors rattled. Some opened an inch. Others flew wide, revealing slivers of rooms she didn't recognize, yet felt. A church pew soaked in rain. A school bathroom mirror fogged with handprints. A car seat splashed red. The doors weren't memories. They were prisons. And they were opening. A wind tore through the corridor, loud and violent, like a train screaming through a tunnel. It knocked Evelyn to her knees. The doors blew wide. From each one poured shadows. Twisted, shrieking, misshapen things that once might have been people. They crawled, staggered. Some walked upright but wrong, limbs too long, heads too smooth, or not smooth enough. They surrounded her. She screamed. One leaned close. It wore her brother's smile. "You can't close what's been opened." Another pressed its face near hers. It was hers. Older, hollow-eyed, lips sewn shut with thorny wire. "We are what you forgot." She ran, not forward. Up. There was no staircase, but somehow she ran up. The hallway bent, defying gravity, doors swinging and slamming behind her. Screams followed. Laughter, weeping. A final door appeared at the end. Black, beating like a heart. She pushed it open, and the world shifted. She was in a white room, blinding, silent. A single chair at the center. And in it, her father. Tied. Eyes wide. Mouth gagged. He looked at her, full of a panic that didn't belong to memory. She hadn't seen him in years. Not since the night he'd disappeared. She thought he'd run. Now, looking at him, seeing the marks, the filth, the tears, she realized the truth. The house took him. He shook violently. Tried to scream. Behind her, a new sound. Footsteps. Slow. Measured, and then the voice. "Welcome back, Evelyn." She turned, and for the first time saw it fully. The thing in the antlers, 10 feet tall, skin like bark or bone. Its face a hollow mask that shifted between her father, her mother, her brother, and something she didn't know. But that knew her. It crouched, lowering itself until it was eye level with her. "You've opened all the doors," it whispered. "Now open yourself." Then it reached forward, touched her chest, and everything fell away. Evelyn was no longer in the house. She was in the memory of the house, inside herself, and she was still just a child. Alone, and it was still outside the closet door. Knocking. Evelyn was 6 years old again. Sitting on the floor of her childhood bedroom, staring at the closet door like it might grow teeth and devour her. The carpet beneath her felt damp. though she couldn't tell if it was from her own sweat or something leaking through the foundation of the memory. Her hands trembled in her lap, tiny fists balled tight as her breathing came fast and shallow. But it wasn't just the fear of what was behind the closet door that turned her blood to ice. It was the terrible, creeping realization that she'd been here before, more times than she could count, and had buried every trace of it in the back of her mind like an unmarked grave. Outside the door, the knock came again. 3 slow, deliberate raps, not loud, not frantic, confident, patient, then silence. And in that silence, the air changed. It thickened. Pressed down on her little chest like invisible hands, forcing her to listen, to remember, to feel everything she had once fought to forget. The memory around her wasn't frozen. It was breathing. Every inch of the room pulsed with life. Her toys twitched slightly when she wasn't looking directly at them. The walls flickered. The ceiling cracked like dry skin. Her child self stayed still, eyes wide, lips quivering as if waiting for someone, anyone, to come save her. But no one would. Not now. Not then. Evelyn, the woman, was also in the room, watching, somehow inhabiting the space and yet apart from it like a ghost haunting her own past. She walked toward the bed slowly, careful not to disturb the scene, though she doubted it would matter. The house didn't obey laws like time or logic anymore. It was something far worse, something aware. As she approached her younger self, the little girl blinked once, slowly, as if sensing her presence, and then, in a soft, broken whisper, "Child," Evelyn said, "you said you'd help this time." The words hit her like a gut punch. She dropped to her knees, eyes stinging with sudden tears. "I didn't know. I didn't remember." The girl shook her head. "You always say that." The closet knob rattled. Both versions of Evelyn turned toward it. This time, the knocking stopped, and the door opened on its own. Nothing stepped out. Nothing had to. The air that spilled from the dark space inside was thick with decay and memory, soaked in loss. It wasn't just a closet. It was a coffin, a passage, a wound. Evelyn rose, slowly, and stepped toward it. Inside, the walls were lined with mirrors, hundreds of them, each one shaped like a different doorway. Some round, some tall and thin, others barely wider than her hand. In every reflection, Evelyn saw a different version of herself. One crying, one screaming, one covered in blood, one smiling too wide. But the worst was the one who looked back and said, "You let it feed." Her chest tightened. She remembered the storm. The night her brother disappeared. The screaming in the walls. The way her mother had wrapped herself in silence, refusing to speak of it ever again. Evelyn had hidden in this very closet while it happened. While he screamed. She had heard him, and stayed quiet. Frozen, the creature hadn't taken her. It hadn't needed to. She had given him. The reflection smiled again. "You gave it everything." The lights inside the closet went out. When she blinked, she was back in the hallway of doors, alone, but the silence was gone. Now it whispered, not just voices, not just words, names, her name, her brother's, her mother's, names she didn't even know she remembered. The doors around her opened one by one. Behind each, a horror. A woman stitched into the floorboards, eyes wide and unblinking. A man with no face holding a stillborn child. A hallway of mirrors all cracking in slow motion. And the worst, her own home, present day, her apartment, her desk, her phone, and on the screen a missed call. From herself, she stepped into the scene trembling. This wasn't memory. It was now. The phone lit up again. Her number. She answered, and heard her own voice whisper, "Don't come back. It knows you're awake now." The call ended. The lights exploded. She screamed, and she was back in the white room. The creature with antlers loomed before her once again. But now it wore her brother's skin. Young. Innocent. Eyes black as oil. It stepped forward and reached out a hand. "Come see what they did to me." She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. He took her hand, and suddenly she wasn't Evelyn anymore. She was him, cold, small, trapped beneath the soil. listening to her cry on the other side of the door, his chest crushed beneath weight he couldn't see, the darkness eating at his lungs. Alone. Forgotten. Buried. The last thing he'd heard before the black swallowed him was her whispering through the closet door, "I'm sorry." Back in her own body now, Evelyn fell to the floor sobbing. The grief rose in her like floodwater, filling every corner of her until she could hardly breathe. It had never been the house alone. It had never been just a creature. It had been her silence, her fear, her denial. That's what fed the thing. That's what gave it roots. And now it had grown. Now it was everywhere. She sat there in the white room, hollowed out, her tears falling silently onto the cold, white floor, until a new door appeared, plain, wooden, unmarked. She rose, slowly, wiping her face. She had opened too many doors already. But this one waited for her. She touched the knob and opened it. Inside, her mother, standing, alive, waiting, her back turned, her voice calm. "It's time to finish this." Evelyn stepped through. The door closed behind her and vanished. The door was gone. Evelyn turned to where it had just been, her hand still raised as if trying to catch it before it disappeared. But the wall was solid now, smooth and featureless. No knob, no frame. Just blank white, like the house had swallowed the way back. Ahead, her mother stood still, facing the far wall of a room that looked like nothing Evelyn remembered. Yet it felt deeply familiar, like something she'd forgotten from a dream that never quite left her blood. It was a room made of silence and old light. No furniture. No windows. Just walls that seemed to pulse gently with each of Evelyn's heartbeats, as if the house had learned the rhythm of her body and now matched it, echoing her existence. Her mother's silhouette was motionless. Even her breath wasn't visible. For a second, Evelyn wondered if she was just another memory, a ghost. But then the voice came, low and exhausted. "I told them not to build here." The words were flat, lifeless, not a greeting. Evelyn took a hesitant step forward. "Mom?" She turned slowly, and Evelyn gasped. It was her mother. Yes, but aged far beyond the years that had passed. Her hair hung in clumps, matted and streaked with streaks of soil and ash. Her eyes were sunken but burned with something sharp and glassy. Madness, maybe, or memory. Her lips were dry, cracked, but her face was calm. "I told them the earth wasn't quiet," she said, walking slowly toward Evelyn. "That it remembered. That roots don't just grow, they listen, they carry things. Things that shouldn't be carried." Evelyn shook her head. "You disappeared. 7 years. We thought you. I was gone." Her mother smiled, a cold, fractured thing. "They buried me long before I vanished. Buried me under silence. Just like we buried him. Just like you did." Evelyn flinched. "I was a child. So was he." Those 3 words cracked through Evelyn like thunder. Her mother stepped close now, too close. Her breath smelled of dirt and ash. "Do you think I forgot his hands reaching for mine? Do you think I don't still feel them every night in the walls?" She placed her palm on Evelyn's chest, right over her heart. "He's not what you think. None of them are. The thing that wears him, it's older than him. Older than me. It doesn't need death to live. It just needs pain. And we gave it more than enough." The walls began to change. Veins, black and twitching, slowly emerged from beneath the surface. Thin and long, they spread outward, crisscrossing the room like growing cracks in glass. The light shifted. "Dimmed. I came back to seal it," her mother whispered. "To shut it down here, where the root begins. But the house has grown. It remembers. And it's hungry." Evelyn stepped back. "If you knew, why didn't you tell us?" Her mother laughed softly. "You wouldn't have listened. You were already dreaming. You were already part of it." Suddenly, a groan echoed through the room. Not from above. From below. The floor buckled slightly underfoot. Not an earthquake. A breath. Something beneath them was moving. The house was waking again. Her mother gripped Evelyn's arm tightly, her fingers strong for someone so frail. "There's a door under the door. You have to go through it. Finish what I couldn't." What does that mean? Evelyn asked, heart pounding. What door? Her mother's eyes welled with tears. The first door. The one you opened when you were 4. The one in the wall. The one they told you wasn't real. Evelyn's blood ran cold. The crawl space. She remembered it now. Dimly, her brother's whispers. The way they'd squeezed under the boards in the corner of the nursery, where the wall met the floor. A hollow space that smelled like wet wood and old breath. A space she wasn't supposed to fit into, but somehow did. She remembered them crawling through it in silence, playing dead explorers, pretending not to make a sound. She remembered the giggles fading, the darkness thickening, and her brother saying something she never understood at the time, "Don't look at it." Her mother nodded slowly. It's still there, but it's not where it was. The house moves it, hides it. But if you find it, if you open it, it'll take you back to the root. Evelyn turned, scanning the room. How? Where? But her mother's eyes had gone distant again. Her breath short, like something was pulling her away. Her hands trembled. It's getting harder to stay, she said. It's close. It can feel you remembering. It knows you're trying to leave. Then, a new sound, a scratching, subtle, constant. It came from the walls, like dozens of fingers dragging down the inside of a coffin. Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper. If you see the boy again, don't believe his face. That's not your brother anymore. It wears him, like a mask. And then she collapsed. No warning, just fell like a marionette with its strings cut, eyes open and blank. The walls screamed. Literally. A sharp, high-pitched wail burst from every corner of the room, like metal being ripped apart. The black veins bulged, pulsing violently. Evelyn knelt beside her mother, but the body was already cold. She stood slowly, trembling, heart drumming against her ribs. The white walls were peeling now, revealing something deeper beneath. Wood. Mold. Rotting boards that breathed with slow, hungry rhythm. A trapdoor appeared in the corner. She knew without doubt the crawl space. It was calling her again. The whisper she'd buried for decades returned in full, a memory too loud to silence now. Her brother's voice, whatever you do, don't let it hear your name. Evelyn opened the crawl space. The air hit her like a slap, hot, wet, old. She crawled inside, and the house closed the hatch behind her. The passage was tight. The boards groaned with each movement of her body. Dust filled her mouth. Nails snagged her sweater. Something ran along the side of her calf, too fast to see, too cold to be a rat. And then the walls closed in tighter, too tight. She had to turn her head sideways. Her arms burned. The air vanished. Panic surged. Her lungs begged. And then, a light. Faint. Red? She moved toward it. The tunnel opened up into a chamber, a dome beneath the house. Massive. Impossible. Roots twisted from the ceiling like ropes, slick with something that gleamed in the dim light. In the center, a tree. Dead. Hollow. Split open at the base like a screaming mouth, and in front of it, a child. Small, still, wearing her brother's pajamas. He turned slowly and smiled. Welcome home, Evelyn. His mouth opened too wide. And from inside, something else spoke, low, ancient. Let me back in. Evelyn didn't speak, couldn't. Her mouth was dry. Her tongue a lump of stone behind clenched teeth. The child standing before the dead tree wore her brother's face perfectly. Down to the crooked baby tooth, the subtle freckle on his left temple, even the tiny scratch on his forearm from when he'd fallen off the backyard swing. But it wasn't him. It was too perfect. Too still. And those eyes, they weren't eyes. They were mirrors, polished and black, reflecting something she couldn't see, but could feel watching her from behind. The figure tilted its head, impossibly slow, as if trying to listen to the rhythm of her fear. Evelyn wanted to take a step back, but the roots behind her had already begun to move. Slithering silently, curling around the edges of the crawl space like waiting snakes. This place beneath the house wasn't just hidden. It was sacred. Forbidden. A scar the Marsh family had covered up for generations, hoping no one would dig deep enough to let it bleed. But here she was, and it was bleeding. The tree loomed behind the child, like a corpse trying to remember how to breathe. Its bark was blackened, flaking, and every groove carved into it seemed to pulse faintly with light from somewhere far below. An eerie, rhythmic glow, like a heartbeat buried in the soil. Its roots stretched far and wide across the chamber, some thick as sewer pipes, others like human veins etched across the earth. It had grown down, not up, feeding off something deeper. Something it wasn't supposed to have touched. The boy stepped forward. "Do you remember how he cried, Evelyn?" he asked, voice soft. Not mocking, worse, gentle. "How long he called for you before the dirt filled his mouth?" She blinked. "That wasn't you." He smiled. "I was there. I am there." Still, another step. His feet didn't touch the soil. They hovered slightly, like the ground refused to claim him. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. Her breath shook. "What do you want?" she whispered. He cocked his head the other way, as if she'd asked a ridiculous question. "You let the doors open. You let the roots wake. I don't want anything." His smile widened. "I'm already inside." Behind him, the dead tree groaned. Splinters cracked down its middle, like ribs snapping open. From within the hollow trunk, something began to emerge. Not crawling. Unfolding. Limbs that didn't match. Human fingers fused with bone. A jaw that opened in 4 directions. Eyes that blinked sideways. It didn't step out. It grew from the bark, dragged into the shape of a man wearing a memory. Evelyn backed away slowly. The boy didn't follow. He just watched. As if this wasn't his fight. As if he had already won. The thing that rose from the tree let out a wet, rattling sound that could have once been a breath, but now sounded like a death rattle played in reverse. It towered above her, dragging roots behind it like intestines. Its skin shimmered like water over a grave, constantly shifting through faces she recognized. Her father, her mother, herself, her brother, each one breaking through and then dissolving, like drowning people trying to surface, but never quite making it. Evelyn turned and ran. The roots clawed at her feet, tripping her, grabbing, twisting, but she tore through them. The tunnel she'd entered through was gone. There was only one way forward now, past the tree, deeper. The chamber narrowed into a long corridor, carved crudely into the soil. The walls dripped. The air grew heavier with every step. Her ears popped like she was sinking underwater. Behind her, the thing followed. It didn't chase. It didn't have to. It owned this space. The path opened into another chamber, smaller, intimate, and in its center a circle of stones. Within it, a basin of water still, black, reflective. The air was deathly silent. She approached it slowly. Inside the water was her face, but behind her reflection, 2 glowing eyes. The same whisper returned, louder now. "Let me in." Then another voice, familiar. Her mother, strained, far away. "You can end it, Evelyn, but you have to give it something it's never had. A memory it can't consume." She didn't understand. The water rippled, and showed her the day he died. She saw herself and her brother, crawling into the narrow crawl space. She saw the storm, the flickering lights, the creature forming from the shadows, and she saw herself freeze, do nothing. She let him go, let him be taken, because she was afraid. A new memory surfaced, one she didn't know existed. Her mother, afterward, kneeling before the same basin, her hands dripping with blood. "Please," her mother whispered to something in the dark. "Take me instead." The tree hadn't. It wanted the silence, the guilt. It fed on pain unspoken, and Evelyn had fed it well. The voice came again, but now it was her own, from deep within the tree, crying, screaming, begging. She understood now. To stop it, she didn't have to run. She had to remember. Out loud, she knelt by the basin, placed her hand into the water, and whispered the words she had buried for decades. "I was too afraid to save him." The roots around her recoiled like burnt flesh. The chamber shrieked. The boy screamed. The tree cracked. The bark split wide, spilling black smoke and white light in violent pulses. And from within, her brother, whole, real, eyes wide, mouth open, crying. Not a monster, not a memory, him. Evelyn reached in, but something grabbed her wrist, the creature now desperate, its faces flickering faster, its limbs shaking. You can't take him, it hissed. He belongs to me. No, she said through gritted teeth. He never belonged to you. He belonged to me. And she pulled him free. The tree howled. The cavern collapsed. The roots snapped. And everything went black. Silence returned. Real this time. When Evelyn opened her eyes, she was lying in her childhood bedroom. Morning light streamed through the window. Her brother, alive, whole, older, sat at the foot of the bed. He smiled softly. I told you not to let it in, he said. She reached for him, but her hand passed through. Only air, only shadow, and then he was gone. But so was the house. It no longer breathed, no longer whispered. The doors had closed, and the tree, finally, had died. Evelyn stood on the porch of Briarcliff, the morning sun painting long, golden lines across the rotting wood, and for the first time since she stepped foot back into this cursed place, the house was silent. Not a good silence. Not the kind of peaceful quiet that made you believe in second chances or fresh starts, but the eerie, unnatural hush that follows a storm so destructive it leaves even the air afraid to move. The birds didn't sing. The trees didn't rustle. It felt like the entire world had leaned away from the house, recoiling from whatever had just been set loose or buried. She should have felt relief. Triumph, even. She had gone down into the belly of the beast, pulled the memory of her brother out of the clutches of something that fed on silence, guilt and grief, and spoken the truth she had buried since she was a child. But as Evelyn stepped down the porch steps and felt her boots meet solid gravel, covered earth again, she realized something wasn't right. It wasn't over, because the house had stopped breathing, but something else had learned how. Her car was right where she left it, parked at an angle under the bare trees that leaned too far forward, their branches now seeming more like fingers than limbs. She walked toward it slowly, her eyes scanning the tree line, her ears still straining for the sound of creaking wood or whispering roots. Nothing. Just the crunch of gravel under her own feet, and the faint metallic ticking of her engine cooling from the night before. She slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, turned the key. The engine roared to life on the first try. That alone was wrong. The car hadn't started cleanly in months. The battery was old. The starter stuck. But not today. Today, everything responded perfectly. She gripped the wheel tighter. The hairs on her arms rose. She didn't trust it, not for a second. As she pulled out of the driveway, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The house still stood, just as broken and battered as before. But now it looked different. Emptier, somehow. Like something had been scooped out from its core, and nothing had moved back in. The front door was ajar. The curtains in the nursery window flapped softly, even though there was no wind. Something moved behind them. She didn't stop driving. The road stretched out ahead of her like a promise she desperately wanted to believe in. Trees parted. The sky opened. The town came into view. But the farther she drove, the more the world refused to feel real. The radio was dead. Static on every station. Her phone, still no signal. The sun was out, but it gave no warmth. Everything had the texture of reality, but none of the weight. By the time she reached her apartment, her knuckles were white from gripping the wheel. She parked, sat there for a moment, listened. The silence had followed her. Upstairs, her apartment was untouched, no signs of break-in, no overturned furniture, her keys still on the hook, mail stacked neatly by the door, but the air was wrong, still, tense. It smelled of the house, that familiar, awful scent, wet dirt, something metallic, the sharp edge of mildew and rot. And in the center of her living room, resting on her coffee table, as if it had always been there, was the music box, closed, untouched, but humming, just faintly. She approached it slowly, knees trembling, The lid popped open on its own. That off-key lullaby spilled out, slower now, warped like it had been underwater too long. The inside of the box had changed. No longer just a ballerina. Now it held a photo. She picked it up with shaking fingers. Her brother, smiling, older, standing in this apartment. Behind him, the door was ajar. And in the darkness beyond it, antlers. Evelyn dropped the photo. Backed away. The box stopped playing. But the apartment door creaked open behind her. She turned. It was dark on the other side. Not hallway dark. Not building dark, house dark. Evelyn stared into the doorway. It was wrong. The frame no longer led into her apartment building hallway. It led back into Briarcliff. Its walls, its floors, the wallpaper she'd peeled with her nails, the lights that always flickered, and the voice. The one she had heard in dreams and basements and basins of black water. It whispered again. You thought we died with the tree, but we don't need roots to grow anymore. And then, we need you. She slammed the door shut, locked it, pushed a chair against the handle. But deep down she knew it wasn't just a haunted house anymore. The house had moved in. That night, she tried to sleep, but the dreams came hard. Not nightmares. Not exactly. Memories, twisted. Her mother peeling off her own skin to reveal bark underneath. Her brother standing outside her window, knocking, even though they lived on the 6th floor. The walls whispering secrets in voices she didn't recognize. Until she did. Every voice was her own, over and over. Let me in. She awoke to footsteps in her kitchen, alone. But not alone. Something had come through the door she'd closed. And it wasn't done with her. The footsteps in the kitchen didn't stop. They didn't hurry, didn't stumble or falter. They just moved, steadily, patiently, as though whoever or whatever walked through her apartment already knew every inch of it. Knew where the creaky tiles were, which cabinets hung loose on their hinges, which floorboards whined the loudest when stepped on. Evelyn stayed still in bed, her fingers clamped tightly around the blanket. She hadn't realized she'd pulled up to her chin. Her breath stuck in her throat like a lump of glass. That sound, that calm, assured pacing, it wasn't human. Not anymore. It was a sound made by something wearing a shape. Something that had followed her back from the house, but no longer needed to live in the walls. It lived in her. The chair she'd shoved under the door earlier was untouched, still jammed against the handle. But the footsteps kept going. Kitchen to hallway, hallway to bathroom, back again, as if tracing a path it had walked 1,000 times. And maybe it had. Maybe the house hadn't just followed her. Maybe it had always been waiting here, a seed planted in her mind when she was too young to fight it. And now that she'd remembered, now that she'd dragged it into the light, it had bloomed. She sat up slowly. The footsteps stopped. Silence expanded like fog. Then, faintly, a new sound. Water running. The bathroom sink. Dripping. No pouring. She rose, feet bare on the cold floor. Every part of her screamed to stay, to hide, to pretend nothing was wrong. But the last 10 days had ripped that luxury away from her. Pretending was the very thing that fed it. The door to the hallway was closed, but light spilled under it, bright, too bright. She opened it slowly, and saw the water, a thick stream pouring from the bathroom, flooding the hallway, but it wasn't clear. It was black, dark, too thick to be water. It glistened, pulsed. It moved like it had somewhere to go. She stepped into it. The fluid was warm, slippery. Her skin prickled instantly, as though something in it recognized her. She reached the bathroom. The sink overflowed steadily. The mirror above it fogged with steam that shouldn't exist. There was no heat, no air movement. And drawn into that fog, in small, trembling letters, was a message, He sein he well. Her heart stopped. She reached for the mirror. The glass felt soft, like skin. It rippled under her touch, and from deep behind it came a whisper, her brother's voice. But wrong. I'm cold, Evelyn. She stepped back. The water, or whatever it was, had spread behind her now, creeping across the walls, slithering up the baseboards. Her apartment had become a vessel, a new version of Briarcliff. Less wood, more memory. And it wasn't just leaking anymore. It was evolving. The lights flickered. Every bulb in the apartment burst at once, each with a sharp pop like a bone breaking. Then darkness, and footsteps again, but now not pacing. Approaching, steady, slow, and just outside her door. Knock. 3 times. She didn't answer, didn't need to. The door opened anyway. The hallway beyond no longer belonged to her building. It wasn't lined with faded carpet and exit signs. It was long, wooden. The wallpaper stripped in ragged chunks. Doors every few feet, each of them slightly open. And far at the end, barely visible, was a flickering red light. The red door, again. The same one from Briarcliff, from the memory, from beneath the tree. But now it was here, in her home. The footsteps behind her paused, and a voice spoke, low and calm. "Do you remember what you promised?" She turned, and saw herself. But not quite. The thing standing before her wore her face like a mask stretched too tightly. Her smile was too wide. Her eyes, those weren't eyes. They were holes. Windows to something crawling just beneath. It stepped closer. "You said you'd open the door if we let him go." "I didn't," Evelyn choked. "You did. In the water. In the root. You promised. You made the trade." "No. I saved him." The thing laughed softly. "You saved a memory. That's not the same. You traded your truth for his ghost. And now the house is hungry again." Behind her, the red door throbbed like a wound. Evelyn backed toward it. But the hallway didn't stay still. With each step she took, the space stretched, elongated, distorted. The ceiling curved inward. The walls narrowed. And the black water, now pulsing with faint light, flowed behind her, eager to flood. The thing followed. "Open it," it said, "or it will open you." Evelyn reached the door, hand trembling. The surface burned cold, and under her palm, she could feel it breathe. The memory of the first time she opened it flashed again. Age 4, barefoot, her brother behind her, whispering a warning she didn't understand. And she had opened it then, too. But what had come through? She didn't know. Until now. She turned the knob. The door didn't resist. It swung open soundlessly, and inside, a room filled with every version of her. Dozens. Some crying, some dead, some screaming silently into the walls. All of them trapped, eyes pleading, and standing in the center, the tree, alive again, grown taller, deeper, sprouting new roots that wrapped around the bodies of the other Evelyns, feeding. A hollow voice from deep within whispered, "Come closer." She did. 1 step, then 2. Each footfall like a nail being hammered into her own coffin. The tree split, revealed a doorway, and beyond it, a heartbeat, not her own. Heavy, wet, endless. The source of all of it. The first door, the first silence, the first lie. And Evelyn finally knew. The house had never been a building. It was her. Built brick by brick from every moment she looked away. Every scream she smothered, every truth she buried. And now it wanted to come home. The doorway inside the tree gaped before her, wide and pulsing like a mouth that had never once been closed. Evelyn's breath came shallow, every inhale tasting like the underside of wet soil. Damp, metallic, final. She didn't want to step forward. Every atom in her body screamed to retreat, to run until her lungs collapsed, to claw her way back into denial and pretend she'd never come here. But there was no back, not anymore. Her apartment was gone. The door she'd opened no longer led to anywhere human. The house had taken that from her the moment she spoke her brother's name aloud in the dark. Behind her, the versions of herself in the red room moaned softly. Some whispered. Others reached out from behind invisible barriers, mouths stretching wide in silent wails. One version of her, the youngest, sat cross-legged on the floor, humming the lullaby from the music box. Her lips smiling, but her eyes were completely black. Evelyn stepped through the door inside the tree and fell. No sound, no wind. Just the sensation of movement, like falling through layers of thick fog and pain. memories stitched together into an endless spiral. She dropped not through space, but through herself. A thump. She landed on her feet. But the floor beneath her wasn't solid. It rippled like skin. She was in a room again. But not a room made by hands. This one was bone and root. Walls that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. A ceiling of gristle. And in the center, floating, was a heart. Not symbolic, not metaphorical. A real giant slithering heart. It hovered inches above a twisted altar. Its arteries spread out like branches, wrapping around the room, and weaving through the roots like vines choking a forest. It beat once, and the entire room shook. Evelyn dropped to her knees. Her mouth opened to scream, but no sound came. The room didn't allow it. This was not a space for noise. This was a place for listening. And now the heart began to speak, not in language. In memory, she saw it all. Her great-grandmother kneeling in the dirt behind Briarcliff, whispering to the ground while her newborn cried in the distance. Her grandfather, carving runes into the tree in the basement, sobbing as blood ran down his arms. Her mother, screaming into the walls while her husband locked her in the attic for her own good. And her, a little girl, hiding in a closet while her brother died behind the wall. It had always been them. Their line. Their blood. The house hadn't chosen them by chance. They were the architects. They were the wood, the rot, the foundation. The Marsh family didn't inherit the house. They were the house. And now it wanted Evelyn to choose. The heart throbbed again. And this time she heard words. "Feed me something real." "What?" she whispered. Her voice sounded small, swallowed as soon as it left her mouth. "No more guilt. No more ghosts. Give me something you haven't buried." Her mind raced. "I gave you everything. I gave you my brother. You gave me what you already lost." "That's not enough." The heart convulsed. Thick black veins shot outward, slamming into the walls like hammers. The roots above her writhed. One of the arteries uncoiled and slithered toward her like a tongue. One memory. Unspoiled. Unfiltered. Alive, she backed away. "I don't have any." But she did. She knew what it wanted. The one thing she had kept even from herself. The moment before her brother's death. The truth. Not the scream. Not the silence. But what came before? The look on her face. She hadn't been afraid. Not at first. She had been angry. He had told her to be quiet. He had laughed when she cried. She had closed the door to the crawlspace. Just to scare him. Just for a minute, she had walked away. And when she came back, he was gone. That memory, perfect, intact, buried in the soft rot of her brain like a jewel in a corpse's mouth. It gleamed, and the heart felt it. Yes. No. She fell to her knees. "Not that, please. It's truth or blood." A sharp crack split the air. The room convulsed. The ground beneath her fractured like ice. And the faces came. Dozens of them, rising from the floor. Her brothers, over and over, smiling, crying, screaming, melting. And above them all, her own face. Cold. Watching. "You locked the door," it said. "You said it was a game. But you never came back." "I didn't know," she whispered. "You forgot me." The heart pulsed one final time. Then, silence. Not empty. Expectant. Waiting. Evelyn pressed her hands to her chest. Felt her own heart hammering beneath her ribs. And she did the one thing she hadn't done in years. She remembered it without looking away. The moment. The anger. The slam of the door. Her brother's eyes, wide, not with fear, but confusion. And her turning away, feeling the power in it. The triumph, just for a second. That was the moment it had been born. The house. The thing. It didn't rise from the tree. It rose from her. "I'm sorry," she said. Not to the heart, to herself. And the room exploded. Not in flame, not in sound, but in release. The walls folded inward. The veins shriveled. The heart cracked open like a fruit, its insides spilling light and ash. And Evelyn stood alone again. No brother, no root, no house. Just a field, endless and green. She stood barefoot in the grass, the sun warm. And for one heartbeat, she thought it was over. Then the wind blew, soft, carrying a voice she had never heard before. Small, new. "Mom." She turned and saw the boy, not her brother, a stranger, but with her eyes. And behind him, the red door, still open, waiting. Evelyn didn't move. The boy stood no more than 10 feet away, barefoot in the grass, his hair tousled by a wind that hadn't existed until he spoke. "Mom," he said again, quieter this time, as if unsure of the word. His face was young, but his eyes, they weren't. There was an age in them that didn't belong to any child, something heavy and hollow, as though he had seen too many endings and not enough beginnings. She wanted to answer him, to deny the title, to reject the weight that single word threatened to place on her shoulders. But instead, all she could do was stare at him, and at the red door yawning behind him like a wound that had never closed. The boy stepped toward her. Just one step. The grass didn't bend beneath his feet. It parted. "I've been waiting," he said, and the sound of it stirred something inside her that didn't feel like memory. It felt like fate. "You're not," her voice faltered. "You're not mine." "Not yet," he answered. The sun flickered, literally flickered like a faulty bulb, and suddenly the field was colder, grayer. A fine ash began to fall from a sky that had been blue a moment before. Evelyn turned her gaze to the horizon and saw nothing but flat, endless land. No trees, no structures, no signs of life. Just her, the boy, and that bleeding door behind him. "I closed it," she said, more to herself than to him. "I sealed the root. I gave it the truth. I ended the house." The boy shook his head. "You ended a house, but not the house." She stepped toward him now, unsure if she was being pulled by her own legs or by some deeper current she had already surrendered to. "What does that mean?" His face remained expressionless, voice even. "You think it began with you, that your guilt woke it up, that your silence fed it, that saving your brother ended it. It didn't?" Her voice was cracking now. The boy blinked slowly. "There's more than one house." The field fell silent, and Evelyn realized the truth before he even said it. "There's one in everyone." The red door behind him creaked wider, and now she could see inside, not just another room or a hallway, but a tunnel made of bones and beams, of memories she didn't recognize. Furniture half dissolved in rot, paintings weeping black, a hallway lined with doors that had no handles, only keyholes shaped like mouths. "Everyone builds a house from the things they refuse to face," the boy said. "Some bury it so deep it sleeps forever. Others feed it without knowing, and some," he paused, "some walk back into it, over and over again." Evelyn shook her head, her chest tight. "I didn't ask for this." "You didn't have to. You lived long enough to remember. That's all it ever needs." The ash in the sky thickened. A low hum began to rise from the earth, and behind her, the field was shifting, flattening, warping, like the grass had become something else, something that slithered. She turned. There, at her feet, were roots, fresh, growing fast, spreading from where she stood, feeding off her breath. "Why show me this?" she asked, her voice small. "Why bring me here?" The boy finally smiled, not cruelly, not kindly, just inevitably. "Because you're not a guest anymore. You're the architect now." And with that, the field split. A crack tore through the land, wide and deep, revealing a chasm lined with staircases that spiraled in directions that made no sense. Stone, wood, blood, and fire all layered together in impossible architecture. Some of the staircases were upside down. Others led to doors that blinked when she looked at them. It was a place without origin. A blueprint made from emotion instead of design, and all of it wanted her. The boy reached out his hand. "Come build." She didn't take it, but she didn't turn away either. Because beneath her panic, under the dread and confusion, there was something else. A memory. One she hadn't buried but simply never understood. She'd had dreams all her life, of places that never existed. She'd woken with bruises on her arms from walls she couldn't name. She'd drawn symbols in the margins of notebooks, over and over, never remembering why. The house had always been part of her, not a place, a function, a purpose. And she had been chosen not because she was weak or guilty, but because she had the one thing the house needed to expand understanding. She stepped forward, not toward the boy, not toward the door, but toward the edge of the chasm. The wind howled, the staircases screamed, and she said, "If I build it, I decide what it keeps." The boy tilted his head. "That's the lie every builder tells themselves." "But yes, for now you decide." She stared into the abyss, then stepped off the edge. The air around her shattered like glass. The chasm vanished. She landed in a bedroom, but not hers. It was filled with dolls, all of them smiling, all of them watching. On the wall, a single phrase scratched over and over again: "We never forget who lets us die." Evelyn turned and saw a woman in the mirror. Her, older, eyes black, smiling. Behind her the house began to build itself, room by room, door by door, and she knew this was just the beginning. The mirror didn't shatter when Evelyn punched it. It didn't even crack. Her fist hit its surface with a sickening softness, as if striking a pool of mercury. The glass rippled around her knuckles like skin, and her reflection watched without blinking. Older, cruel, wearing that same smile that didn't belong to her mouth. The kind of smile people wear when they know something they'll never say aloud. Evelyn staggered back, clutching her hand. No pain, no bruise, but something had been taken from her in that instant, some piece of certainty or control, scraped away without touch. Behind her the dolls turned their heads in unison, not fast, not sharp, just aware. The room had no doors, no windows, no obvious way out, but it did have corners, too many, 5 of them, uneven, the angles subtly off, as though the room was shaped by a dreamer who had never seen a square. Each corner had something nestled into it: a toy box, a trunk, a small rocking chair, a set of wooden alphabet blocks, and an old, unlit fireplace. None of these things had belonged to her, and yet each carried the weight of memory, like a scent you can't place but recognize all the same. She moved toward the blocks first. They were dusty, their paint faded, letters smudged. She knelt, hesitant, and brushed her fingers across the top layer. They shifted, clicking softly into place. Evelyn, her name. Then the blocks moved again on their own, slowly spelling something new: Youdrewthdor. She backed away instinctively, heart lurching. The firebox groaned behind her. A soft sound. A metal throat clearing. She turned, slowly, and saw the suit inside beginning to move. Not fall, move. Rising in a spiral, as though gravity had quietly quit its job. It coiled toward the hearth like a whisper made visible. Inside the ash, a face formed. Her mother's, mouth sewn shut, eyes wide and wild. Then it vanished with a blink, sucked back into the chimney like it had never been. The floorboards beneath her creaked with pressure. Not weight, intention. The room was adjusting to her decisions, measuring her with every choice. She went to the trunk next. Brass handles, warped wood, the lock snapped open with a sigh before she even touched it. Inside, a pile of blueprints. All blank, no lines, no measurements, just her name in the corner of each sheet, written in thick red ink. OWNR Evelyn. She picked one up, and the ink began to bleed. Letters rearranged themselves. Walls drew themselves out of nothing. Doors etching into existence in places that made her stomach twist. Hallways that doubled back into each other. Bedrooms with no entrances. Stairwells that led upward only to descend. Kitchens shaped like pentagrams, closets filled with teeth instead of clothes. And there, always in the center of the design, the red door. She dropped the sheet, breathing hard. The blueprint folded itself midair and vanished. And then she understood. This room, this impossible, dole-watched, mirror-haunted room, was the architect's chamber, the heart of the house, the place where it wrote itself into existence again and again. And now it wanted her to write the next chapter. The rocking chair began to move. She hadn't touched it. No wind stirred it. It rocked gently, steadily, as if being used by someone she couldn't see. A small, faint voice hummed from it. a tune she knew but hadn't heard since she was 7. The lullaby, the real one, not the broken, haunted music box version. Her mother used to hum it, when the world still made sense, when her brother was still alive, when the walls of her home didn't whisper back. She turned toward the chair, heart clenched tight. It was empty. But as she stared, the wood began to crack, splintering outward like something was trying to crawl out from inside. Tiny fingers, pale and thin, child-sized. She turned away before the rest emerged. Her body moved without her, toward the 5th corner, the toy box. It was closed, but something pulsed beneath the lid. Not light, not sound, a feeling. Like standing over a grave you forgot you dug. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside, a single sheet of paper, crumpled. She picked it up and unfolded it. A drawing, crude, crayoned. 2 stick figures, one taller, Evelyn, one smaller, her brother, and between them, a house. But it wasn't the house from Briarcliff. It was this room. She recognized the corners, the mirror, the chair, and scribbled beneath in jagged letters, the kind only small, frightened children write THEEUS, EVRDCFUKEP Rummy Orange. The mirror behind her rippled again, and this time the reflection was gone. Only the room remained in it, empty. And then she noticed her own hands. They weren't reflected. She looked down, they were still there. But in the mirror, nothing. Not even a shadow. She backed away slowly, and the mirror followed. It didn't move, but the wall around it shifted forward, closing the space between them, dragging itself like a coffin sliding shut. No, she whispered. But the mirror didn't care. It expanded, widened, swallowed the entire wall, and when it reached the floor, the reflection changed again. It showed her future. She was standing in front of a child, the same boy from the field. Only now his eyes were her eyes. He was crying, bleeding, begging, and she was handing him the red door, giving it to him like an heirloom, passing it down. The house was her, and she would become the next mother to feed it, unless she did something impossible. She turned back to the toy box, pulled out the drawing, and tore it. Down the center, the walls screamed. Every doll burst into flames. The mirror cracked, and the room shook with a fury that wasn't anger. It was hunger denied. She ran, not to escape, to destroy, to find the core again, the true heart, not the tree, not the chasm, the root of the first door. Because now she knew, if she could find the first room ever built, the one that birthed all the others, and close that, she could kill the house for good. But first, she'd have to get there. And it was buried deeper than any memory she'd dared face. The house didn't shake. It shifted, a movement so silent and intimate it felt like the twitch of a muscle under skin, a reflex of something watching itself breathe. Evelyn sprinted down a hallway that hadn't been there seconds ago. Behind her, the doll room burned, the sound of tiny voices crackling through the flames like popcorn popping in reverse. The mirror screamed as it splintered apart, and that scream didn't echo through space. It pierced time. Every fragment that shattered on the floor showed a different version of her falling, each from a different height, in a different house, through a different memory. All of them terrified. All of them Evelyn. The hallway stretched as she ran, not physically, psychologically. The walls closed in, peeling back in layers like old wallpaper, revealing snapshots of her past. As she passed, they flickered to life, her first nightmare, her first lie. The first time she saw her mother cry and said nothing. The house had grown teeth now, and they weren't physical. They were personal, emotional, designed to gnaw through her without ever touching her skin. Somewhere behind her, the lullaby began again. That crooked, broken tune, not quite in key, playing from nowhere, from everywhere. But now it wasn't mechanical. It was being sung, softly, by a child's voice she hadn't heard in 20 years. Her brother's voice. You forgot me first. She didn't stop. Couldn't. The hallway ended in a spiral staircase, narrow and tight, coiling downward like a throat ready to swallow. The wood was wet beneath her bare feet. When had she lost her shoes? And the walls dripped with condensation that smelled like old memories and unwashed toys. Her breath came fast, shallow. She was descending into something deeper than the house now, something older. She felt it in her bones, the way the darkness pulled at her spine like a hook, dragging her toward the one place even the monsters of her mind were afraid to live. Each step down felt longer than the last. Reality slowed, stretched. Her ears rang, not from volume, but absence. There was no ambient noise here. No creak of wood, no hum of walls, not even the rhythm of her own breath. Just a pulsing silence, as if time had stopped out of respect for what waited below. The steps ended. She found herself standing in front of a small, simple door. Not red, not black, white, just like the first time. She didn't need to open it. It already was. Inside was a room that didn't belong in the house, or anywhere else in the real world. It was featureless. No furniture, no corners, no color. Just endless white space, but not bright, dim, like light trying to remember how to shine. In the center, a child sat on the floor, cross-legged. Not her brother. Her, at age 4, wearing the same polka dot pajamas, holding the same stuffed rabbit she lost after the funeral. The child looked up and smiled. Finally, she said. Evelyn stepped forward slowly. "What is this?" she asked. Though her throat felt dry, her voice paper thin. The child didn't move. "This is where you buried it," she said. "The first door. The first silence. I don't remember this place. You're not supposed to." The walls began to pulse. The floor rippled. From above, a faint heartbeat emerged. Not steady, not organic. A stuttering, fractured rhythm like a record skipping on a turntable made of bones. The child stood. "You slammed the door in his face," she said. "You told yourself it was a game, but you never opened it again. Not even when he called." Evelyn's breath caught. "I was 4. The child tilted her head. "You were enough." And now the space began to collapse. Not in on her, but into her. Memories poured from the walls in waves, the voice of her mother yelling behind locked doors, the sound of her father throwing glass in the kitchen, the choking silence at the dinner table the night after the body was found, the dry voice of a therapist saying, "You're lucky to be alive." She wasn't lucky. She was chosen. And now she was beginning to see why. The child Evelyn took her hand. The touch was ice. "This isn't your memory," she said. "It's your creation. You built this room the moment you refused to say what happened, and it grew with you. Fed off you. The more you denied it, the deeper the house burrowed. The more you forgot, the more it remembered." Evelyn tried to pull her hand away, but the child held tight. And her eyes, they were mirrors. No iris, no pupil, just reflections of Evelyn's adult face, cracked and crying. "You want to kill the house," the child whispered. "Then open it." The walls peeled away, revealing another door. Not red, not white, wooden, old, splintered. The real first door. The one in the crawl space. The one she had locked with her own tiny hands. Evelyn walked to it. Her hand trembled. She reached for the knob. The child watched silently. As the door creaked open, Evelyn's stomach dropped. Inside was darkness. Not absence of light darkness. This was presence darkness. A thing. It breathed. It watched. It waited. And now it spoke, not in words, in memories. Evelyn saw herself, sitting alone at the funeral. Her mother beside her, stone-faced. Her father gone. Aunts whispering. Eyes on her. Pity. And fear. Because everyone knew, even then, that she was the one who had closed the door, and no one had ever dared say it. The darkness surged forward. She stood her ground. It wrapped around her slowly, not cold, not hot, just true. And she understood. This was not an enemy. This was a wound, festering because she refused to clean it, feeding because she refused to feel it. It didn't want her life, it wanted her grief. Fully. Finally, given without excuse. So she did something she hadn't done in 20 years. She cried. For her brother, for her mother, for herself. She cried with her whole body. And the darkness, it stopped. Then it broke, like glass. The house screamed, not in pain, in release. It collapsed around her in an instant, folding like a dying lung, all walls and doors and memories crashing inward, dragging echoes and whispers and shadows with them. The lullaby stuttered once, then went silent, and Evelyn was back in her apartment. On the floor, breathing, shaking, alive. The red door was gone. The air was warm. The walls were just walls again. She stood slowly, walked to the kitchen, turned on the sink. Clear water ran. No blood, no voice, no black sludge. And for the first time in her adult life, she felt the silence, not as a threat, but as peace. The mirror in the hall still hung crooked. She looked at her reflection. Just her, eyes tired, face pale, but no shadows behind her, no masks. She smiled. It was small, shaky, but real. She whispered, "I'm sorry." And the house, wherever it had gone, said nothing, because it was gone, or sleeping, or waiting. But for now, Evelyn was free. She turned out the light, and the silence stayed. Evelyn didn't dream that night. Not of the house, not of her brother, not even of doors. Her sleep was deep and still, the kind of rest that comes after a storm has passed and every cell in your body finally stops bracing for the next hit. She woke to sunlight warming her cheek and birdsong slipping through the open window. Real birds, not whispers pretending to be them. For a moment, as she lay there with her eyes half closed and her limbs limp across the bedsheets, she let herself believe it was over, that the house had finally loosened its grip, that its voice had gone quiet for good, that she'd reached the end of it. But when she stood up, she noticed it immediately. The mirror in the hallway was straight, perfectly centered. She had left it crooked. It had always hung askew, held up by one faulty nail that had never been fixed. That mirror had leaned left her entire adult life. She knew it like she knew the cracks in her ceiling, or the exact way her floor groaned outside the bathroom. It was personal, familiar. Now it was perfect, corrected, and that was wrong. She approached it cautiously, staring into her reflection, as if it might blink on its own. Her image was normal, no shadows behind her, no distortion in her features. But something lingered in the background. A small, silent ache in the corners of the glass. Not movement, not figures, but a presence, like a song that had just stopped playing, and the silence still hummed with the ghost of its melody. She touched the glass. It was cold. Too cold. She stepped back, checked her apartment. Every room, every door, all normal, all untouched. But that same feeling followed her, like being watched by something pretending not to watch. It clung to the air, to her breath. In the kitchen, her coffee maker sat exactly where it always did. But inside the carafe, someone had left a drawing, folded, simple crayon on white paper. She unfolded it with shaking fingers. It showed a house. One window, one chimney, no door. Just the words scrawled in a child's handwriting at the bottom, "So mtndi left thuc." She dropped it, backed away. Her pulse thundered in her throat. She checked the windows. All locked. She checked her front door. Still deadbolted, but it didn't matter. The message had made itself clear. The house was gone, but not everything in it. Something had slipped out, and now it was here. Somewhere. Watching. She tried to rationalize. Maybe she'd drawn it in her sleep. Maybe it had slipped between pages of her old notebooks. But her gut told her the truth her mind refused to say aloud. The house hadn't died. It had adapted. It no longer needed walls to live. It lived in her. In the seams of memory she hadn't yet closed. In the truths she still refused to name. She threw the drawing in the trash, took a shower, turned the water as hot as it would go. Steam filled the room, fogged the mirror. She wiped it clear, and saw herself. But not. The figure in the glass had her face, but younger, fresher, before everything, before the death, before the silence, before the guilt grew roots. It was the her that existed before the first door was shut, and that version of Evelyn stared back with wide, innocent eyes and mouthed something. Not a scream, not a warning, just a word, one syllable. One name, her brother's, Ben. The mirror fogged again. When she wiped it clear, the reflection was normal, her own tired face, water dripping from her hair. But her mouth, she hadn't moved it. And yet, on the mirror, words appeared in the fog. He's still waiting. She staggered back, her towel slipping from her shoulders. No, she whispered. I saved him. She had dragged his memory from the heart of the tree. She had walked through the layers of her grief and made peace. She had faced the truth. She had done everything the house asked. And still it wanted more. She checked the hallway again. That mirror, still straight. That drawing, still in the trash. Everything exactly as she left it. But that was the trick. That was always the trick. Because when the house couldn't frighten you with screams, it haunted you with silence. When it couldn't lock you in, it followed you out. A knock echoed through the apartment. She jumped. It was gentle, delicate, almost polite. She approached the door slowly, heart in her throat, pressed her eye to the peephole. No one. Just the hallway still. Empty. She didn't open it. She waited 5 seconds. 10. Then she heard it. A voice. A whisper, pressed right against the wood. Are you going to shut me out again? She backed away slowly. No, she breathed. She hadn't spoken that name aloud in years. Not once. Not even to herself. She had tried to forget, and now the forgetting had turned against her. She turned on every light in the apartment. TV, music fan, noise, desperate, stupid noise, trying to drown it out. But underneath it all, she still heard it. A second heartbeat, not in her chest, in the walls. Thump, thump, too slow, too heavy, too familiar. The mirror flickered. The lights dimmed. The TV glitched, briefly showing a house where a sitcom should have played. She stood in the center of her living room, spinning, panicking. It wasn't supposed to end like this. But then the thought came. What if it had ended? What if this wasn't part of the house anymore? What if something worse had taken its place? Something that learned from the house, wore its shape, but needed no door to enter. She sat down, hands trembling, and forced herself to speak. Ben, she said aloud, if you're here, if this is you. The lights flickered. The heartbeat stopped. I'm sorry. Stillness. Real, terrifying stillness. Then, a sigh. Right behind her, she turned. No one. Just the mirror. Now hanging crooked again, bent slightly to the left. Exactly as it had always been. Exactly as it should be. She approached it. Touched the glass. This time, it was warm. And she understood something that went deeper than any nightmare she had lived through. She would never be rid of it. The house didn't want to be destroyed. It wanted to be known, to be remembered, to be spoken of. It wanted to be passed on, and she had been chosen to carry it, not as a curse, but as a story, one she had to tell, again and again, until someone else knew it too. Until someone else saw a red door where there should be none. Until someone else answered the knock. Evelyn began writing the next day. Not because she wanted to, not because she needed closure, but because the pressure inside her chest made it impossible not to. Every moment she tried to go about her normal life, making coffee, checking emails, taking shallow breaths while scrolling through news she didn't care about. She felt it pressing against her lungs. Like the words she wasn't speaking had weight. Like silence had grown claws inside her and was now trying to tear its way out unless she made the house visible again. Not with memory, with ink. She didn't even have a plan. She sat at her desk, pulled open a blank document, and typed a single sentence. The house always begins with a whisper, and once she did, it all came back, not as a vision, not as a nightmare, as truth. She typed for hours, fingers flying, her breath catching every few minutes when the words came too fast, too sharp. She wrote about the hallway that had never ended, the red door that had appeared in a place where no door had ever been, the boy with her brother's voice and something else in his eyes, the room of dolls that burned without fire, the blueprint that drew itself, the heart that demanded honesty. She wrote the memory of closing the crawl space door, the guilt she buried when no one asked her why she didn't follow him. She wrote about the tree and the house beneath it, and the version of herself that watched it all happen, like a mother admiring her own child's destruction. She wrote until her fingers cramped and her shoulders trembled. When she looked at the clock, the sun was gone. It had been 7 hours. She had no memory of time passing. She saved the file without naming it and closed her laptop. That's when she heard it again. The knock, soft, measured, right against the back of her neck. She froze. The air behind her had shifted, not dropped in temperature, changed texture, like a wall had formed, but slowly, gently, as if it had always been there and only now decided to be noticed. She turned. Nothing but her bedroom door. It was slightly open. It had been closed before. Of that, she was sure. She rose and walked toward it. Each step made the floor feel more distant, like her legs were sinking into something just beneath the surface of her apartment. She touched the doorframe, listened. No breathing, no footsteps, only the sound of her own pulse in her ears. She pushed the door wide. Inside, nothing. Her bed, her lamp, a book she'd forgotten she was reading. The mirror above the dresser hung at its usual crooked angle, and still something felt off. Not seen, not heard, known. The way a room changes when you find out someone died in it. Not visibly, emotionally, energetically. She stepped into the bedroom, and the door closed behind her. By itself, no breeze, no creak, just shut. She spun, tried the handle. It opened easily. But the hallway outside wasn't hers anymore. Not quite. The walls were still cream-colored, the rug still stained with that same coffee spill from 6 months ago. But the far end, it extended too far. Too impossibly far. A hallway that should have ended in a coat closet now stretched into shadow, and in that shadow the red door waited. Not pulsing, not glowing, just waiting, as if it had never left, as if it hadn't been destroyed, as if the house hadn't been vanquished but simply folded inward, crawled through the thin cracks of memory, and rebuilt itself in her habits, her corners, her daily rituals. Evelyn stepped back into the room, closed the door, and sat on her bed. Her hands trembled. She knew what it wanted now. The knocking, the drawings, the reflections that didn't behave, the heat in the mirror, the cold in her name. It wasn't trying to pull her in anymore. It wanted her to build. The story was the new house, and every word she wrote gave it foundation. Every confession she typed laid another brick. She had done what no one else had done before. She named it. She made it real. She gave it a voice. And now it was learning, adapting, becoming something bigger, something mobile, something it had never been before. She turned to her nightstand, opened the drawer. Inside, a single sheet of paper, one she hadn't put there. Another drawing, the same house from before, but now it had a door, wide open, and inside that doorway was a figure, drawn in thick, black crayon. No face, just eyes, circles within circles, and beneath it the words WEMVR Lefty. She dropped the paper, ran to the kitchen, ripped the laptop open. The document had changed. She hadn't touched it, and yet new words filled the page. A new paragraph she didn't remember writing. She thought she had survived, but survivors don't bring blueprints with them. The cursor blinked at the end, waiting, inviting, daring. She stared at the screen, at her own words, and for the first time in weeks, months, years, she understood something so clear it cut through the fog in her mind like a shard of clean glass. It was never about the house. It was about remembrance. Every trauma forgotten, every silence swallowed, every lie repeated to survive. That's what built the halls. That's what formed the red doors. She hadn't walked out of a haunted house. She had carried it out inside her. And now she was teaching it how to walk. The lights flickered. A new knock echoed from inside the fridge. She laughed, not loud, but broken. Because of course, the house wasn't waiting behind doors anymore. It was in the electricity, in the plumbing, In the code of her own words, a virus written in fear. A virus with her voice. She picked up her phone, tried to call Laura. Her sister answered. Evelyn. Her voice was groggy. I need to ask you something, Evelyn whispered. A pause. Then, slowly. What's wrong? When we were kids, did you ever see the door? Silence on the line. Then you told me never to talk about it. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her fingers. I did.
Yes.
Lara's voice cracked. You said if I ever mentioned it, he would come back. Who? A pause so long Evelyn thought the call had dropped. Then, finally, the boy in the walls. The line went dead. Her phone turned off, battery full, but the screen stayed black. Reflected in it, the red door, right behind her, waiting. Evelyn didn't turn around. Not at first. She stared at the black screen of her phone, paralyzed by the reflection that had no business being there. The red door stood behind her in the reflection only, vivid, impossible, humming with a kind of pressure that pressed against the back of her skull, like a storm rolling in through her blood. But when she twisted her body around, half hoping, half begging that the screen was just lying to her, the hallway was still the same. Bare. Quiet. Empty. No door, no sound, no boy in the walls, just the echo of her sister's voice lingering in the silence like smoke that didn't belong. You told me never to talk about it. He would come back. The boy in the walls. She lowered the phone slowly. Screen still black, as if it had given up on pretending to be helpful. Every word Laura had said repeated itself in her mind, but none hit harder than the unspoken realization behind it. This thing had touched her sister too. And Evelyn had erased it, buried it, not just for herself, but for Laura. She'd been the one who taught everyone to forget. That's how deep the house had crawled. That's how wide it had grown. Her entire life had been a blueprint in disguise. And now it was time to see what had already been built in her absence. The hallway light flickered once, then died. A hum rose in the dark, low, deep, familiar, not a mechanical buzz, not a human voice, but a combination of both, layered and slow, like the breath of something learning to exist out loud for the first time. She stood, slowly, the floor beneath her bare feet warmer than it should have been. Not electric warm, living warm. She walked toward the hallway. The kind of walk you take when you're trying not to wake something already staring at you. The carpet had changed. Slightly. She didn't know how she could tell, only that she did. The texture had gone soft. Wetter. As if her apartment were forgetting how to be a place and remembering something else instead. Something older. Something with no corners. She stopped in the hallway. Still no door. Still no sound. But her bedroom was behind her. She glanced back at it. And it was gone. Replaced by a wall. She turned fully. There was no seam. No evidence it had ever been anything else. Her home was shifting again. Not like before. This wasn't the house dragging her into it. This was her own mind reshaping the world. Consciously or not, Evelyn was building the house whether she wanted to or not. That's what it had wanted all along. Not her terror. Not her blood. Her memory. It fed on remembering. But not the kind you whisper in therapy. It wanted the full truth. The emotional truth. The kind that broke bones and silenced families. And she had given it just enough to teach it how to build without her. The hallway light flickered back on. And this time, the red door was real. There, perfectly centered at the end of the corridor. Paint peeling. Handle rusted. No hinges. Like it had grown there. She walked toward it slowly, each step feeling less and less like movement and more like compliance. She stopped just inches from the wood. It vibrated softly, like it was humming a lullaby she couldn't hear with her ears, but felt under her skin. Her hand rose. No knock this time. No invitation. The door opened on its own. Inside, her childhood bedroom. Again. The one she had torn apart in every memory she'd ever dared to reclaim. But this time it was quiet. Untouched. Frozen in the moment before everything went wrong. Toys still stacked. Curtains still drawn. Closet door wide open. not hiding anything this time. And on the floor, playing with blocks, was the boy. Not her brother, but the boy in the walls. The one her sister remembered. The one she had told Lara to forget. He looked up at her, smiled. His teeth were too white, too many. "Welcome back," he said. His voice was wrong. Not evil, not monstrous. Just wrong in the way a dream is wrong when it begins too familiar and ends too deep. "I don't remember you," she whispered. He tilted his head. That was the point. The room shook slightly, not physically, emotionally, like a wave of grief rolled under the floorboards. He stood now, small, still, barefoot, but the air around him shimmered, like heat off a highway, bending reality into something elastic. "You did remember," he said, walking toward her. "You just didn't recognize me without the teeth." She stepped back. "What do you want?" "You've already given me everything," he said. "I just came to return it." He opened his palm. Inside it, a key, rusted, blackened, still dripping with something that looked like ink, but moved like blood. She didn't take it. "I don't want it." "You wrote it?" he said simply. "That means you own it." She shook her head, tears rising in her throat. "No, I ended the story. I gave it closure. I said the truth. And now," the boy said softly, "you have to let others say theirs." The room began to fall apart. The wallpaper peeled first, then the floor. Then the sky above the ceiling opened, revealing not stars, not night, but another room, with another child, another Evelyn, another house. The boy held out the key, and this time she took it. The moment her fingers touched the metal, she saw them all, the other houses, all over the world, in quiet suburbs, in silent farmhouses, in crowded apartment complexes, built by children who shut doors too fast, built by mothers who kept secrets to survive, built by men who couldn't say they were sorry, built by silence, by guilt, by the slow, careful architecture of pain. The house wasn't a monster. It was a symptom, and now it was growing, because more and more people were remembering. She dropped the key, and the boy vanished. So did the room. So did the door. She was back in her apartment, alone. The document on her laptop had one new line: "Now let them build their own doors." Evelyn closed the file, printed it, and mailed it anonymously to a local newspaper. Then she deleted it, burned the USB, erased the backups. Not out of fear, out of trust. Because if the story was real enough, it would find a way to survive. And if others had been building rooms in silence too long, they'd need a blueprint to tear them down. The house was no longer hers alone. It had always been everyone's, and now it would finally be seen. 3 days passed. 3 perfectly normal, perfectly uneventful days. The kind of days Evelyn hadn't felt in years, where nothing whispered her name from the walls, where reflections stayed still and doors stayed shut. She spent the first morning wandering around her apartment in disbelief, half waiting for the static to crawl back into her ears, for a familiar chill to tighten around her spine, but it never came. The coffee machine worked like it should. The lights flicked on without delay, even the hallway mirror, the same one that had once carried versions of her face she no longer recognized now, reflected nothing more than a tired woman brushing her hair in silence. And for once, that silence didn't weigh 100 pounds. It just was. On the second day, she walked outside for the first time since the collapse. The sun felt new, not warm but clean. The city moved around her like it always had, impatient, loud, alive. But she noticed something else now, something she hadn't paid attention to before. The way people flinched when their phones vibrated. The way children stopped mid-step to stare into alleys with wide, wondering eyes. The way a man on the train kept checking over his shoulder, like someone might appear in the space between blinks. That night, Evelyn sat by her window with a glass of wine and watched the building across the street. Apartment 4C, curtains always drawn. No movement, no lights. She'd never met whoever lived there, but she noticed now, just barely, how the window seemed darker than it should be. Not just unlit, absorbing. like it drank the streetlight instead of reflecting it. She told herself she was being paranoid, that the house hadn't followed her, that the door hadn't reopened. But on the third day, someone knocked. Not her front door, not the hallway, not even a wall. The knock came from her inbox. An email, no subject line, no sender, just a file, docs. She almost deleted it, almost. But her fingers hovered over the mouse and froze. Curiosity had always been her weakness. That, and guilt. She opened the file. One page, one sentence, written in a typeface she didn't recognize. I read your story. Now I hear knocking too. She stared at it for a long time. Then she saw the signature, faint at the bottom, not typed, scanned. A signature written by hand. L. Marsh, Lara, her sister, had writ it, and now it had found her. The guilt came back in a wave, thick and sour, curling in her throat like smoke. She had warned Lara. She had tried to keep her out of it. But she'd also known, deep down, that the moment she wrote it down, someone close to her would be the first to open their own door. She picked up the phone, called. Voicemail. Tried again. Voicemail. On the third try, a voice answered, but not Lara's. A man. Hello. Evelyn froze. Who is this? She asked, cautious. The voice on the other end hesitated. You don't know me. I found this phone on the street. It was just lying there, still unlocked. Just one message on the screen. Evelyn's chest tightened. What message? 2 words, the voice said. Quieter now. She waited. Then he said them. Red door. She hung up, no goodbye, no breath. Just hung up and dropped the phone like it had grown teeth. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her coat, her keys, and the address she still remembered from when Lara had briefly lived in a tiny studio across the river. She hadn't been there in years, but her legs moved like they knew the way without help. The train ride was a blur. The city looked wrong. Slightly askew. A little too quiet in places where noise usually ruled. Everyone looked like they were trying not to hear something. When she reached Lara's building, she found the front door ajar. Not wide open, just barely nudged, as if someone wanted to pretend it had shut, but hadn't committed to the act. She stepped inside. Up the narrow stairwell. Each step creaked. That part hadn't changed. The third-floor hallway was empty. But there was a smell. Familiar, not rot, not blummery, thick and warm and too intimate. She reached apartment 3B. The door was open, not fully, but enough. Inside, darkness, stillness, the kind that listens. Lara, she called out. No answer. Just the soft creak of a floorboard somewhere deeper inside. She stepped in and closed the door behind her and saw the mirror first, same one from their childhood home. The same antique, wood-framed oval she thought had been thrown out years ago. It hung above the couch now, crooked, flickering, as if the glass couldn't decide what it wanted to reflect. Her own face, then not, then her face again, but older, tired, worn. She turned away from it, called out again. Lara. This time a voice answered, but it came from the bedroom, and it wasn't quite Lara's. It was off. Just enough to raise the hair on her arms. Come see what I remembered. Evelyn walked toward the voice. One step, then another, until she reached the bedroom door. It was shut. She touched the handle. Cold, she turned it. The door opened. And inside, Lara stood in the center of the room. But she wasn't looking at Evelyn. She faced the far wall. A red door had been painted on it, not physically built, just a crude shape drawn in thick red strokes. Crayon blood. Paint? She couldn't tell, but it pulsed, as if something on the other side was breathing. Lara, she whispered. Her sister didn't turn, just raised a hand, touched the painted door, and the wall shuddered, not cracked, not peeled. It responded, as if it were alive. I didn't remember until I read your words, Lara said, her voice distant, hollow. I didn't want you to remember. Lara nodded slowly. I know, but now I do. And he's coming back. Who? Her sister turned now. And the look on her face, not fear, not anger, relief. The boy in the walls, she said. I remember his name now. Evelyn shook her head, backing away. No, but it was too late. The door on the wall opened, not outward, inward, into a black space that shouldn't have existed in a studio apartment, and from within it 2 hands reached out, small, childlike, and behind them, eyes, too many, too bright, too old. Evelyn tried to run, but Lara grabbed her hand, gripped it tight. "No more forgetting," she said. Then she stepped forward, into the door, and vanished, the wall sealed behind her, smooth again. No paint, no red, no crack. Evelyn stood alone, hands still warm from her sister's grip, and the house's whisper now louder than ever. The wall was smooth, just drywall now. No sign of the red door that had pulsed with breath. No trace of Lara or the boy in the walls, no evidence that anything impossible had just happened. But Evelyn's hand still tingled from her sister's grip, tight, firm, final. The room smelled of static and cold paper, like the breath of a forgotten book. She pressed her palm against the spot where the door had vanished. It was warm, a warmth that grew, spread, crawled up her wrist and into her arm like something recognizing her. Not fire, not electricity. Recognition. The wall pulsed once beneath her hand, and that's when she heard it again, the slow, rhythmic knock. Not from the wall. From inside her. 3 soft thumps against the back of her ribs, as if something was already building a door through her. Evelyn stumbled back, breathing sharp, each inhale coming faster, like her lungs were afraid of what they might inhale. Her head spun. The mirror in the living room flickered again as she passed it, the reflection shifting between her apartment and something else. A forest. No, a corridor lined with chairs. Hundreds of chairs, all facing a single television screen in the distance. Silent. Waiting. She fled the apartment. The building. The street, out into the night, where even the cold air felt too still. The city wasn't comforting anymore. It was complicit. Too many darkened windows. Too many people walking like they were rehearsing escape routes. Evelyn moved with no destination. Just motion. Every alley looked like a memory. Every bus stop pulsed with the weight of a door waiting to be painted. She ended up at a diner. The kind that never closes. The kind with cracked booths and buzzing lights and a waitress who looks like she's lived 3 lives already. Evelyn ordered coffee. Didn't drink it. Just sat there, staring at the tabletop, letting the voices of strangers wrap around her like a flimsy blanket. Then she saw the boy. Not the one from the house. A different boy. Sitting in a booth alone, legs swinging above the floor. 8, maybe 9. Pale, quiet. Dressed in an old-fashioned coat too large for his frame. He stared at a napkin he was slowly tearing in half, over and over. She tried to look away, tried not to see what her gut already knew. But then he looked up, right at her, and nodded, just once. Not a greeting, a confirmation. She stood, moving toward him before she had the chance to talk herself out of it. "Do I know you?" she asked. The boy didn't answer. He pushed something across the table. A folded map, drawn in ink that shimmered under the diner's flickering light. She hesitated, then opened it. It wasn't a map of streets or cities. It was a map of rooms, all connected by halls of different lengths and shapes. Some stairs, some elevators, no labels, no legend, just a single red dot near the top. Beneath it, a word scribbled in trembling letters, "You." Her hands shook. She looked back at the boy. But the booth was empty. He was gone. No door had opened. No sound had marked his leaving. She looked around, but no one else in the diner had seen him. No heads turned. No surprise. Like he'd never been there. But the map remained. And on the back, a phrase written in something thicker than ink, "The doors have multiplied." Evelyn left the diner. Walked back to her apartment. The city around her felt different now. Not visibly, but under the surface, like a river that had changed its course without telling anyone. Every building had a breath, every stoplight a pulse. She clutched the map in her pocket like a lifeline. Back inside her apartment, the silence didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like something holding its breath. She pulled out the map again, spread it across her coffee table, It had changed. New lines appeared, new rooms, more red dots, all spreading from that single starting point U. The story wasn't ending. It was branching, replicating. The boy's map was alive, and she was its axis. She ran to the mirror in the hallway, turned it face down. The silence cracked like a scream swallowed just in time. The bathroom mirror had fogged over without her touching the sink. In the fog, she saw a symbol, a spiral made of tiny doors, drawn in the condensation. Beneath it, a phrase traced by an unseen finger. Tell more, or it tells for you. She wiped it away, but the pressure in her head built like altitude sickness. Too much truth, not enough silence to hold it. She realized then, the house hadn't collapsed. It had escaped. Her story had been the gate. Every person who read it added a new corridor, a new stairway, a new echo. Some would see red doors, some would hear whispers, and some would open them. Lara had been the first, but not the last. The boy in the diner wasn't a person. He was a marker, a signal. The way the house kept track of where it had spread, where it needed to grow. She looked again at the map. The red dots were moving. Tiny, yes, but unmistakably shifting, like embers crawling across paper. Her name sat at the top, but new names were forming, written slowly, illegible at first, but coming into focus. One of them, so familiar it made her heart collapse in her chest. Lara Marsh, still alive, still inside, or changed. A knock came at her door, soft, measured, not threatening, just patient. Evelyn didn't move, not toward it, not away. The knock came again. Then silence. But when she finally opened the door, no person. Just another map, pinned with a rusty key. This one smaller, more detailed. And she saw it now for what it truly was. Not a map of rooms, not of a single house. It was a blueprint of infection, an architecture of memory so potent it didn't need bricks or timber. Just remembrance. And now it was remembering her. The key didn't feel like metal. It felt like breath cooled into shape. Lighter than it should be, colder than the air around it, but undeniably solid, like something that belonged to her before she was even born. Evelyn turned it over in her hand, heart thudding so loud it drowned out the hum of her apartment. The new map it came with was even more intricate than the last, and where the previous one had hinted at complexity, this one reeked of intent. The hallways didn't just stretch. They circled, folded, intersected, and twisted in on themselves like a brain dissected and laid flat. At the center again, a red dot. Her name, written in those trembling letters. Only now there was something added beneath it. A date. Tomorrow. She didn't sleep that night. She didn't even try. She sat at her kitchen table. Map spread out, key between her fingers. Every lamp turned on, every blind drawn. She thought about calling someone, but who? Everyone she knew had drifted out of her life in the months since the first door opened. Not because they didn't care, but because the space between her words and their understanding had grown too wide to cross. And now she was past bridges. She was somewhere else entirely. Just before dawn, the knocking came again. Not at the door this time. From the ceiling. 3 steady taps. Then silence. And then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text message, 1 sentence. The room is ready. The key began to hum in her hand. Soft, subtle, but enough to let her know it was time. She didn't know what the key opened. But somehow, she did. She left the apartment. Not hurried. Not panicked. Just resigned. The city was still asleep. Empty streets, humming transformers, and a breeze that felt like someone breathing down her neck. She followed the map, not the physical one, but the one in her memory now, burned into the inside of her skull from so many hours of staring at it. Each turn brought her closer. Every alley she passed felt thinner, narrower, like they'd been carved out by something watching from behind brick. Finally, she reached the building. Old, red-bricked, boarded windows. The kind of place people passed without really seeing, because something about it made the eyes slide off the edges. She stepped inside. Door unlocked. No alarms. just dust and silence. The key pulsed. She followed its tug, up 2 flights, down a corridor lined with doors that had no numbers, no peepholes, just keyholes shaped like mouths. She found the one. Not because it looked different, because it felt warmer, like someone had just left. She placed the key into the mouth, shaped hole. It fit with a soft click. The door didn't open, it exhaled, and then melted away. Beyond it, blackness, but not empty. Heavy. The way grief feels when it wraps around your bones and pretends to be your skeleton. She stepped inside. The light behind her vanished. And then, slowly, a glow bloomed ahead, a single room. Furnished like a child's bedroom, but not from her time. Older. Dresser, wooden bed, lace curtains. And in the center of the room stood a figure. Back turned. Small. Still. She didn't need him to turn around to know it was the boy. Not the one from her house, but the idea of him. The manifestation of the knock that never stopped. He finally spoke. "You brought your key." "Yes," Evelyn said. "You understand now," he replied, still not turning. She hesitated. "Understand what?" "That memory builds faster than bricks," he said. "That houses aren't made from wood, but from silence." Then he did turn, and where a face should have been, hers, her own face, younger. Frozen in the moment before she told Lara to forget, before she sealed the crawlspace, before she lied. "You built the first room,"
she
said, "but you didn't stop there." Evelyn shook her head. "I wrote it to end it. You wrote it to remember." Behind him, her, another door, red, pulsing. This one had no handle, just a mirror in the center. Evelyn approached it, looked inside, and saw not her face, not even her reflection. She saw a theater. Rows and rows of chairs, each one filled. Each person watching a screen that wasn't on. Their eyes blank, their mouths open. Waiting. Hungry. "Who are they?" she whispered. The boy, who was her, smiled. "They are your readers." And then the screen turned on, and it played her story, scene by scene, room by room, and with every moment that unfolded, more chairs appeared, more people, all watching, all remembering, all building. And she understood the last truth. She hadn't opened the house. She hadn't escaped it. She had given it voice. She had turned memory into blueprint, truth into lumber, grief into mortar, and now the house was everywhere. Every story someone read, every whisper someone believed, every red door someone dared to imagine. It wasn't haunting her. She was haunting them. She turned from the door. The room behind her was shifting now, growing, walls stretching, new rooms forming in the dark beyond. Every emotion she'd suppressed, every scream she'd silenced, was laying a new foundation. The boy smiled again. "You thought telling the truth would free you." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes, but it freed us." And with that, he vanished. The room trembled, lights dimmed, and Evelyn stood alone in a room she had never seen, yet entirely made. The only way out was through the next door, and beyond it, more rooms waited. Rooms not from her mind, but from those who had rid hers. The house wasn't done growing, it had just begun. The next door was smaller than the last, painted not in red this time, but in the palest, almost translucent white. A white so faint it seemed unfinished, like it had forgotten it was ever meant to be a door at all. It didn't pulse. It didn't hum. It simply existed, standing there at the end of the stretching room Evelyn had just created, as if it had been waiting for someone to admit it had always been there. And unlike the others, it wasn't locked. She didn't knock. She didn't have to. The moment her hand touched the frame, the door folded inward, not opened, folded, like a sheet of memory collapsing in on itself. And behind it, a hallway stretched longer than anything she'd walked before. But this one was different. There were no shadows, no whispers, no trembling silence, just walls covered in pictures, framed photos, endless rows of them, each one flickering gently, as if lit from behind by candlelight. At first, she didn't recognize any of them. Children on bicycles, old couples holding hands in hospitals, strangers staring into mirrors, wide-eyed and alone. But then she saw a photo halfway down the corridor. A girl, maybe 10, sitting on the back steps of a familiar brown house. She was crying, hands covering her face, and next to her, unseen by her younger self but clear in the image, was a shadow, tall, thin, watching. Evelyn leaned closer. It was her, older, present day, watching herself cry from a distance. And just behind her in the photo, the unmistakable curve of a red door stood in the corner of the frame, out of focus, like it didn't want to be noticed but had no choice. Her stomach twisted. She moved farther down the corridor. Each new photo became more familiar. Her first apartment, her mother's wake, the college dorm where she'd heard the tapping for the first time in a dream and convinced herself it was just the radiator. Places she'd forgotten, moments she had erased, now laid out frame by frame in perfect sequence. But they weren't memories anymore. They were rooms. Each picture, she realized, wasn't just an image. It was a blueprint. The doorways behind every captured moment led to places the house had already been. And some of them had red tape over the frames, not blocking them, binding them, sealing something in or out. She reached the end of the corridor, and there, beneath a single hanging light, sat a desk. On it, a box, worn metal, padlocked, and next to it, a note written in a child's looping scrawl, for the one who names what everyone else forgets. She touched the box. It shuddered under her fingers, familiar, alive, like a heart that had learned to beat in metal instead of flesh. She didn't need a key. The box knew her. The lock slid open with a sigh. Inside, papers. Hundreds of them, all filled with names, not people. Rooms. Each one had a title. The room that repeats. The room that breathes. The room that smiles back. She flipped through them, heart racing. Some had notes scribbled in the margins. Others were blank but stained with smudges of ash and fingerprints, pressed so hard they'd bled through. One name caught her eye, the room that knows your voice. Beneath it, a sentence was written in red ink. Once you speak here, it never forgets the sound of you. She looked up and realized the walls around her were gone. The corridor had vanished. The photos, the desk, the light. In its place, a room made entirely of whispering. Not walls, not air, whispers. Voices she didn't recognize murmuring in overlapping layers, rising and falling, all in different tones, some crying, some laughing, some just repeating one name over and over. Her name, Evelyn, Evelyn, Evelyn. She turned in circles. No exits, no doors, just a pulsing center of sound, growing louder the longer she stayed still. She spoke without meaning to. Stop, everything did. Silence slammed down like a falling ceiling. Then, one voice, singular and perfect, echoed from the dark. You taught us how. The whisper was hers, not just the tone, the phrasing, the rhythm, the breath behind it. It repeated her sentence, again and again. Stop, stop, stop. It laughed, a brittle, dry chuckle, like wind through dead leaves. She pressed her hands to her ears, but it was inside her now. Then another door opened. This one directly in front of her, splitting the air with a crack that didn't sound like wood breaking. It sounded like time. Behind it, a hospital hallway, fluorescent lights flickering above. At the far end, her mother's room. She stepped forward instinctively. She knew what this was. She'd avoided this door for too long. She walked, slowly, shoes squeaking softly against the tile that felt too cold. She reached the room. The door creaked open. Inside, her mother lay still in bed, alive, breathing, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The IV machine beeped softly. A nurse adjusted something near the foot of the bed, but didn't look at Evelyn. Didn't see her. Evelyn stepped in, and the nurse faded, like smoke curling back into shadow. Only her mother remained. Evelyn whispered, "I'm sorry." Her mother's head turned, and for the first time since the funeral, Evelyn saw those eyes again. Sharp, pale, knowing. "You made a house out of silence," her mother said. "Then you passed me the blueprints." Tears stung Evelyn's face. "I didn't mean to." "We all do," her mother replied. "It's how we survive. But now you're not surviving anymore, are you? Evelyn shook her head. The room dimmed. A red door formed on the far wall. Not painted. Born. It pulsed like a wound refusing to heal. Open it, her mother said softly. But remember, not every door leads out. Evelyn walked toward it. Her reflection stared back at her in the doorknob's shine. She touched it. Felt her bones remember something before her mind could. The door opened, and she stepped through, into a place she hadn't seen since childhood. A memory she had refused to write. A moment she had erased so deeply even the house hadn't found it until now. The night her brother disappeared. The real night. Not the version she'd told herself, but the truth. She was holding the flashlight. She dared him. Go in the crawl space. I dare you. Ben had laughed nervously. You first. And she had said the words that built everything after no. You. The red door had been there even then. Not visible, but present. She saw it now. Behind the insulation, behind the boards. It had always been there. Ben had opened it, and never come back. Evelyn sobbed. The room, the memory shook with her grief. And from the darkness, a voice whispered, You're finally home. She turned, and the boy was there again, smiling. Behind him 100 doors, 1,000, all opening, one after another, endlessly. The house had grown beyond her. And now she had only one choice left. Step through the next door, or let it step through her. The door didn't open like the others had. It didn't creak. It didn't fold. It breathed. Evelyn stood frozen as it inhaled, slow and deliberate, pulling warmth from the room, pulling memory from the air like a mouth that had been dry too long. The pressure behind it was real. Not just emotional. It pushed against her chest. Her ribs, the tender flesh behind her eyes, like a storm building inside her body instead of the sky. And then, just as the pull reached its peak, the door exhaled. Not with sound, but weight. Her knees buckled under it. The floor didn't shift, but she felt as though she had stepped into a different kind of gravity. Inside there was nothing. Just white. Endless, cold white. But not sterile. Not clean. White the way paper is before someone decides what story it has to carry. The kind of white that begs to be stained. Evelyn stepped inside. No walls. No ceiling. No floor. Just space. But she felt supported as though whatever this place was, it agreed she had finally earned the right to stand here. She took another step, and that's when the first sound came. A whisper. But not around her. Inside her. Not words. Not language, just recognition. The sensation of being seen by something old and awake. Then, it began to form. Slowly. A shape out of the blankness. A table, square and plain. A chair, then another. A notebook, closed, black leather cover. The edges worn and curled like it had been opened thousands of times, but never fully written in. Evelyn sat. She didn't remember moving. She just was sitting, hands folded, staring at the notebook like it had something to confess. It opened on its own. Inside pages. Thousands of them. Words she hadn't written. Stories she hadn't lived. And yet, she recognized them all. The girl who found her sister sleeping in the crawl space after being gone 3 weeks. The boy who stopped speaking after his mother disappeared into the bathroom and never came out. The woman who swore her attic whispered her name until she wrote it down. None of them were Evelyn. All of them were. Each page ended with a door. Red. Painted in ink that shimmered when she blinked. She flipped faster now, hands shaking. And then, one page near the center stopped her. Blank. But at the bottom, one sentence, "This is the room that knows how you'll end." She stared at it, and behind her the boy arrived. Not walking. Not appearing. Becoming. His voice, small but steady. "Do you want to know?" She didn't turn to look at him. "I thought I was writing the story," she whispered. "You were," he said. "Until you gave it away." To who? To them. She turned now slowly and saw that he was not alone. Rows and rows of chairs. Again filled. Faces familiar and strange. Readers, viewers, witnesses. The ones who read the words she thought might save her. Each face held a candle. Some still lit. some flickering, some already dark. You brought them here, the boy said. They followed your voice. I never told them to follow, she said, voice cracking. They didn't need your permission, he said. They just needed your honesty. A mirror rose from the floor in front of her. Not glass. Liquid. It showed not her reflection, but every room she'd built. The attic where her mother used to cry without reason. The bathroom where her brother's shoes were still drying the day after he vanished. The closet she never opened again. She watched the mirror ripple. The doors were open. Not in the memory, in real time. Somewhere, people were reading, and building, and walking through. I didn't mean to open all of them, she said. But you did, the boy replied. And now they want to know how it ends. She looked back at the notebook. Still open. Still blank. Do I get to choose? The boy tilted his head. You get to write. She picked up the pen that hadn't been there before. It was warm, alive. She pressed it to the page, and felt her skin burn with every word. Not pain. Remembrance. She wrote of Lara, of her voice echoing from a room no one else could see. She wrote of the boy, not as a villain, but as a door frame that was always waiting for someone brave enough to knock. She wrote of every room, every hallway, every memory that refused to be buried. She wrote until her fingers bled ink, until the notebook sighed shut. The mirror shattered. The space around her turned dark, not from absence, but from completion. A door rose. Red, but this one had no handle, no keyhole, just a slot. The size of a single notebook. She slid it in. The door breathed once, and opened. She stepped through, into a library, endless, stacked with stories she didn't recognize, some glowing, some silent. But all doors, and on the far wall, another mirror. This time, when she looked, she saw every face she'd ever tried to forget, and for the first time, they were smiling, not in joy. In release, the story had changed, not because she escaped the house, but because she taught others how to leave theirs. And now she had one job left. She stepped toward the center, picked up a pen, turned to a blank page, and wrote, Part 1. The knock always comes before the truth. She had written the truth, not the truth she'd rehearsed in therapy, not the versions she polished for sympathy or shaped into cautionary tales. This was the truth with teeth. The kind that lingered in the back of her throat when she laughed at the wrong time. The kind that built rooms without permission. Evelyn stood now in the center of a library not made by brick or timber, but by words, and somehow, the silence around her was louder than anything she'd ever heard. The shelves stretched beyond the eye's reach, lined with books that hummed faintly, like each was breathing in its sleep. Some glowed dimly from within their bindings. Others bled ink from their pages. None of them had titles, and at the far end of the room there was a door. Again, always a door. But this one didn't pulse, didn't hum. It whispered, softly, like it was tired of waiting. She walked toward it. The floor beneath her creaked not with age, but with memory. Every step echoed like a chapter she'd forgotten writing. As she approached, she realized there was no handle, just a peephole, and behind it, the sound of pages turning, then voices, familiar. Her mother, her sister, her own voice as a child, but they weren't speaking to her. They were reading her. She placed her eye to the peephole and saw something impossible. A hallway, twisting, long, a knot of turns and descents, but this time from above, as if she were perched in the rafters, watching herself and others move through their own haunted blueprints. She saw Lara, walking with a candle down a corridor lined with photographs of memories Evelyn had locked away. She saw Ben, her brother, no longer a child, but something else, not aged, not changed, worn thin by being remembered too late. And then she saw the boy, the original one, the one with too many teeth. He stood in a room made of mirrors, staring at himself, or versions of himself, and every reflection had a different name. None of them sounded right. All of them began with the same letter E. Elias. Eli, Elam, Ezra. She whispered one under her breath, Elias. The peephole went dark, the door swung open, and Evelyn was pulled in, not walked, not stepped, taken. Inside was not a room, but a void lined with names. Millions of them, suspended in midair like ash from a fire that refused to die. Some glowed red, some flickered. Some were fading, vanishing letter by letter, and some, the oldest, had already turned to dust. Her own name appeared, bright, fresh. Still trembling from the ink she'd spilled into the notebook, and above her name a line. A name that was not hers, the house's name, but it wasn't written in English. Not in any language she knew, just symbols, carved into silence. She stared, trying to make sense of them, and the moment she almost did, her vision twisted. Not blurred, not dizzy, but rewritten. The room spun backward, like someone had yanked a tape from a cassette player and started fast, rewinding time itself. Faces reversed their aging. Voices played in reverse. Rooms uncollapsed, and when everything settled, she was standing in her childhood bedroom. The real one, not the memory, not the version the house built. This was untouched. Dust on the shelf. The tiny notch in the wall where Ben had crashed his toy helicopter. The faint mark on the doorframe from her 8th birthday, when her dad had measured her height, whispering, "Soon, you'll be taller than all this." She was home, but the air was wrong. Too quiet. She turned and the boy stood in the doorway, not grinning, not haunting, just watching. Like he was waiting to see if she'd finally recognize him. "I know you now," she said, quietly. "I know," he whispered. "I gave you a name," she said. "But you didn't give me yours," he replied. That stopped her. Because she hadn't. Because somewhere along the way, she had become so tangled in being the author, the survivor, the architect, that she had forgotten who she was before the first knock came. "What's the house's name?" she asked him. He smiled, sadly. "It doesn't have one. I saw it. I almost understood it. You weren't supposed to. Names give things boundaries. The house can't have one. It feeds on forgetting. Naming it would kill it." She paused. "Then what happens if I do name it?" He took a step closer. "You build something else. A truth house?" she asked, smiling bitterly. He nodded. "You don't lock people in. You let them walk through." She looked around the room. The door to the hallway was gone. So was the window. Only the mirror remained, cracked now. She stepped toward it, touched the glass, and the moment her fingers met her reflection, every crack sealed. The house stilled, its breath quieted. And in that stillness, Evelyn spoke, "You are not mine." The boy blinked. "I am not yours," he whispered back. "You are not my grief. You are not my memory. You are not my shame." She turned from the mirror, back to the boy. "I'm not keeping your name anymore," she said, and she gave it a name. A soft, final word. A word not spoken aloud here, but etched inside her, and when she did, the house shifted. Not collapsed, not destroyed, just changed. It sighed like a thing released from duty, and the boy faded. Not like a ghost, like an ending. The room brightened. Warmth touched the walls. Light returned to the corners. Evelyn stood in the center, alone, but no longer haunted. No longer written by something else. She was the author now, and she chose the last word. She walked forward, and the door behind her sealed for good. The light didn't rush in. It waited. Like a hesitant guest at the threshold, it paused in the space just beyond Evelyn's fingertips, flickering softly, as if unsure whether it was truly invited. For the first time in what felt like years, maybe longer, Evelyn didn't feel watched. The silence didn't lean toward her. The air didn't press inward. She had named the house, and in doing so, had built a new rule, truth before fear. But even so, the ground beneath her wasn't stable yet. It wasn't crumbling. But it remembered how. She stood now in a place between places. Not a hallway, not a room. More like a memory that hadn't decided what shape to take. The world shimmered with potential, waiting to be sculpted by decision. And in the center of it all, a single page floated. Not bound, not anchored, just drifting in air that didn't move. She reached for it, and it came to her. There were no words, no lines, only a texture, one that felt unnervingly like skin, not wet, not dry, but aware, and as she turned it in her hand, letters began to bloom, not drawn, not printed, but breathed into being. One word, then another, then a sentence. The house is not gone. It has only changed its shape. She didn't need to read the rest to understand. It had never been about killing it. You don't kill memory. You don't destroy story. You change it, redirect it, give it another ending. And endings, Evelyn knew now, are never as final as we want them to be. Some endings, in fact, begin again. A low hum rumbled beneath her feet, not threatening, not angry, curious. She knelt and placed her palm to the ground. It pulsed, once, like a heartbeat rediscovering its rhythm. The house, if it could even still be called that, was alive, but no longer feeding. It was listening. From the distance came a flicker of footsteps. Not hers, not the boys. These were heavier, familiar, two sets, Lara and Ben. The hum grew stronger. And suddenly, Evelyn wasn't alone anymore. They stood in front of her, blinking against the new light like newborns waking from a long, fevered dream. Lara was the first to speak. "Where are we?" Evelyn looked around at the unfinished walls, the way space bent and shifted without resistance, the way air hummed with questions instead of dread. "I think we're inside the story," she whispered. Ben stepped forward, older now. No longer frozen in the night, he vanished, but changed. His face was still his, but softened by years that had been lost, then returned. "I remember now," he said. The door, everything." "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, voice cracking. "I made it happen." Ben shook his head. "You didn't make it. You just opened it." Lara added, "And we followed." The three of them stood together, and the page Evelyn still held began to shimmer again. New words appeared, scribbled across its surface in ink that shifted color with her thoughts. Stories spread because they are carried, not forced, not trapped. Carried. She read the words aloud, and the room responded, not with sound, with doors. They rose, dozens of them, across every visible wall. None of them red this time, all pale, soft, waiting, each one labeled, each one a story. Some had names of people Evelyn had met briefly. Some were unfamiliar, but each door carried the same sentence engraved above the frame. This one chose to remember. Ben reached for one, Lara another. Evelyn stood still. "You're not coming?" Lara asked, glancing back. Evelyn shook her head, slowly. "I think my story's not done here." Lara looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She just smiled. A real one this time. Not a mask, not a memory, but the kind that only comes after the worst has passed. Ben nodded. "We'll see you again." When it's time, they opened their doors, stepped through, and vanished, not in silence, but in peace. Evelyn turned back to the page. It was blank again, ready. This was her choice, to stay, to write, to build, but not with fear anymore, with truth. And truth, she understood now, isn't always safe, but it's solid. She sat down in the center of the room and picked up a pen that hadn't been there a second before. And she began to write her story, from the beginning, not for survival, not for escape, but to leave a map for the others, for those still trapped in the old versions of their own haunted houses. And as the words spilled from her hands, the air grew warmer. The house, what it had become, settled. A place no longer ruled by the hunger of forgotten pain, but one lit by the pages of stories remembered too late, now finally told. Evelyn didn't know how long she'd been writing. The concept of time no longer ticked forward in this place. It pulsed. It stretched. It settled into the folds of her story like ink soaking into fabric. She didn't get tired, not in the physical sense. Yet something beneath her skin told her that every word she added to the page was taking something. Not in a cruel way, but in a necessary one. Like every sentence was blood let from a fever. And still, she wrote, because the house was still changing. Because someone, somewhere would still find a red door tomorrow. Because memory does not sleep. Around her, The room continued to shift, not at random, but in quiet response. When she wrote about fear, the lights flickered. When she wrote about forgiveness, windows opened in walls that hadn't been there. The architecture was no longer haunted. It was honest. The house wasn't punishing her now. It was learning, adapting, maybe even healing one truth at a time. But then she made the mistake. She wrote a name she had never said aloud, not in therapy, not in dreams, not even in her private thoughts where guilt tends to rot in silence. Peter, the first boy, before Ben, the one who disappeared in the woods behind her grandmother's house. She had been 6. He had been 9. A cousin, a neighbor, no one had really said. Just that he was there, and then he wasn't. A red jacket lost in a sea of pine trees. She remembered the search dogs, the questions, the way no one ever looked at her quite the same after. Because she had seen something, because she had lied. The moment she wrote his name, the air turned. Warmth left the room like breath punched from lungs. The paper beneath her fingers trembled. The walls groaned. Not in pain, but like they were remembering a version of themselves they'd buried deep. The truth of Peter wasn't just another room. It was a foundation beam she had ignored. And the house wanted it back. She dropped the pen. But the page kept writing, on its own. The words bled up from beneath the surface of the paper, like something pushing from underground. She tried to tear the page, but the fibers held. Not strong, stubborn. This story wanted out. On the wall in front of her, a new door appeared. Red, of course, but different. No handle, no frame, just a smear, like a mouth pulled open too wide, and through it she heard the forest, the pine trees, the distant sound of a boy calling for help. Peter, he was alive in this memory. But barely. She rose to her feet. She didn't want to go through. But the room had gone still, unbreathing, unblinking, and something told her if she didn't open this wound, she would never leave. She stepped forward, touched the red. It was warm. And then she was back in the woods, evening light dripping through the trees like honey, the air thick with the smell of moss and coming rain. She was 6 again, but not in her body. She was watching her 6-year-old self, frozen at the edge of a creek, staring at something just beyond the camera lens of memory. The red door, half buried in the slope, tucked between roots, breathing. Peter stood in front of it, afraid. He looked back at her. And child, Evelyn had said, "I'll tell them you went home." The boy had hesitated, then nodded, and walked inside. No scream, no struggle. He had trusted her. She had chosen silence. The adult Evelyn fell to her knees. Watching it happen again, truth, raw and unforgiving, was like biting into glass. This was the moment she had repressed so completely. It had warped every story that came after. The red door sealed behind him. The forest faded, and she was back in the house. But now, it wasn't stable. The walls tilted slightly, like the weight of her lie had pulled everything off balance. The shelves bent, the floor curved, and in the distance she heard it again, the knocking. Faint, rhythmic, insistent. But this time it wasn't asking to come in. It was asking to be remembered. She stumbled back to the desk, grabbed the pen, wrote quickly, frantically. About Peter. About how she'd silenced the memory. About how his name became a warning she could never say aloud. The house began to steady. Barely, but enough. The lights stopped shaking. The door faded from the wall. Not gone, but released. Then something new happened. The books on the shelves began to close. Not slam, not vanish. Close. Like stories reaching the end of their arc. She stood and walked to the nearest one. Touched the spine. The title appeared in letters that had been invisible until now. The Girl Who Stopped Building with Shame. It glowed softly. She touched another. The Brother Who Never Wanted Revenge. And another. The Sister Who Came Back Different, but not broken. Each story was about someone who had passed through the house and survived. Not by fighting it, but by telling it. The house wasn't an enemy. It was a recorder, a keeper, a place where grief, once acknowledged, could rest. But that's when she noticed it. The far wall, one door, different from all others, made of black glass, not red, not pale, just void. There was no label, no frame, just a pulse, soft, like a second heartbeat buried beneath her own. She stepped toward it. The air around it was silent, but not peaceful. Just listening, waiting. The boy's voice returned, not outside, but in her chest. "You don't have to open it," she whispered, "but I will." "Then understand," he said. "This is not a memory, it's a mirror. What will I see? What the house has become, now that it knows what you are." She hesitated, then placed her hand on the glass, and it breathed. It didn't crack. It didn't cloud. It didn't even ripple like water might when touched. The black glass simply welcomed her palm with an unnatural stillness, so perfect it felt wrong. Evelyn's breath hitched. The surface was warm, not like skin, but like something deeper, a warmth that lived behind memory, a temperature that could only come from recognition. This wasn't just a door. This wasn't even a reflection. This was a reveal, and Evelyn had been unknowingly writing toward it all along. Her fingers pressed firmer into the mirror, and without warning, the surface yielded, not with resistance, but with invitation. It folded around her hand, swallowing it, then her wrist, then her arm, and before she could pull back, it took the rest of her. But this wasn't like the other doors. There was no falling sensation, no disorientation. There was simply arrival. She blinked once, and found herself standing in a room that didn't resemble anything she'd seen before, in this house or any other. There were no walls, not really, just enormous floor to ceiling panes of mirror on every side, each one angled slightly, so the room fractured infinitely in all directions. Her reflection stared back 1,000 times over, each version slightly askew. One looked younger, another older. One was bruised. One was smiling. One stared with eyes completely black, each Evelyn frozen in a posture that wasn't hers. It was like walking into the broken mind of the house and seeing every version of herself it had ever imagined. She turned slowly, her feet making no sound on the mirror floor. Her own reflection lagged slightly behind, not enough to notice unless you were watching for it. She was. And that's when she saw it. One version of herself hadn't moved at all. It was facing her, but not copying her. It stood still, arms at its side, eyes locked forward, cold, unblinking, not a reflection. An observer, she stared, and slowly it smiled. It was her face, but there was something subtly missing. Not her features, not her expression. It was missing weight, emotion, humanity. This was the version of Evelyn that never told the truth, never unlocked the doors, never remembered. It was the keeper, the archivist of her silence. And now it wanted to speak. Its lips moved, but the sound came not from its mouth, but from every mirrored wall around her, all at once. "You wrote the truth," it said, "but you never released it." Evelyn opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her voice stolen the moment she stepped through the black glass. "You named the house," the reflection continued, "but you still think it's yours." Evelyn took a step forward. "You are me," she whispered, forcing sound through the cotton of fear lodged in her throat. "No," it said, "you are mine." The lights above pulsed, dimmed, and from behind one of the mirrors a new sound emerged. Typing, not slow, not deliberate, frantic, desperate. The click-clack of a keyboard being punished. She followed the sound, weaving through endless corridors of glass, reflections twitching as she passed. The sound grew louder, then she found the source, a desk, a figure hunched over a keyboard. Typing, her face, but skeletal now, decomposing in places. Hands cracked like dry porcelain. She stepped closer, leaned over the shoulder of the corpse that wore her skin. The monitor glowed. One sentence blinking at the top of a blank document. "If I don't stop writing, the house can't erase me." It blinked, over and over. Over and over. A scream curled in Evelyn's throat but never left. Because she understood now. The house didn't want her to finish the story. It wanted her to keep writing it forever. each sentence not a step toward freedom, but a stone in a circular path that never broke. It had fed on her story, not as predator to prey, but as audience to performer. Every fear shared, every name uttered, every memory recovered. It devoured not to destroy, but to trap. And now it had become her. Not the house, the version of her that refused to stop. The reflection followed her down the mirrored hallway, the observer, the writer, the forever author. You thought the truth would set you free, it said, but it only made you easier to read. Evelyn ran. She didn't know where to. It didn't matter. The mirrors offered no exits, only more versions of herself watching. Some whispered warnings, others cried, a few laughed, and one, the worst, was still typing, over and over and over, until Evelyn stumbled, collapsed, hit her knees against the hard glass, and stared at the reflection in the floor. It was her face, but younger, the exact age she'd been when Peter disappeared. It whispered, "You lied to save yourself. And you kept lying by never letting the story end." Evelyn felt the pen reappear in her hand. She hadn't summoned it. It had been given. Her other hand held a blank page, the same kind as before, same thickness, same warm texture. She looked up at the mirrors, at the girl she had been, at the corpse she might become, at the version of herself who only watched. And she knew what had to be done. She could not write her way out, but she could write her way closed. She lifted the pen, not to add, not to prolong, to finish, to place a final sentence. One so honest the house couldn't feed from it, and with trembling hands, Evelyn wrote, "I forgive myself." The mirrors shattered, all of them. At once, the sound wasn't glass breaking, it was silence exploding. The room went black, then white, then nothing, and Evelyn opened her eyes. She was on her back, lying in a field, real sky above her, wind brushing grass against her palms, no walls, no doors, no knocking. She sat up slowly and saw it, in the distance, a small house, old, quiet, still, with every window open, and not a single door in sight. The wind carried no whispers this time. It moved through the tall grass with a quiet, indifferent grace, as if nature itself had no more need to lean in, no more secrets to tuck between its blades. Evelyn sat there, legs curled beneath her, staring at the house on the hill. It wasn't red, it wasn't black, it wasn't anything remarkable at all. It was just a house, a place, 4 windows, all cracked open to let the breeze slip through, and not a single door on any visible wall. That struck her harder than it should have. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, she didn't have to go in. There was no knocking, no bated breath, no pressure building behind wooden panels. It waited, and in its stillness, there was something she hadn't felt in ages: respect. She rose slowly, joints stiff not with pain, but with the weight of release. Her body felt like it had finally stopped bracing against ghosts. As she walked through the grass, each step brushed against a version of herself she no longer needed to carry. The girl who had lied to keep the quiet. The teenager who heard knocking in dreams and pretended it was thunder. The woman who had built a fortress out of forgetting and called it survival. With every footfall, they slipped off her like old skin. The house stood no taller than a cottage. Its paint was faded, but not neglected. The kind of aging that comes from weather, not apathy. Ivy curled up one corner, but only just, as if unsure whether it had permission to stay. There were no door frames, no steps, just an open threshold where a door might once have been. It looked like someone had removed it deliberately. A choice. Not destruction, but invitation. She stepped inside. No threshold creaked. No air shifted to choke her lungs. Instead, it smelled of dust and old books. Sunlight pooled across the wooden floor in long strips, warming the center of the room, like a spotlight waiting for someone to tell a story worth hearing. Furniture was sparse. An old armchair, a low table, a bookshelf with more space than spines. On the far wall, a picture frame faced backward, its contents hidden. That was the only thing that felt unfinished. Evelyn moved toward it slowly, not out of fear, but respect. The kind of pace you carry when approaching a grave or a memory with teeth. She flipped the frame around. Inside wasn't a photograph. It was a mirror, fractured but not broken, like it had been shattered once and then carefully stitched back together. She stared into it. Her reflection blinked back, as always. But this time it didn't copy her. It watched her, not with menace, not with judgment, but with recognition. And Evelyn knew, in that instant, that this house didn't belong to her. It belonged to every version of her that had survived the others. Each crack in the mirror was a chapter. Each silver thread of glue, a truth told too late. And now that it had been made whole again, the house had taken on a new purpose. Not to hold memory hostage, but to witness it. There was movement in the corner of the room. She turned, and her breath caught. A child, 6 or 7, wearing a red jacket, eyes wide, not afraid, just waiting. "Peter," she asked, her voice barely there. The boy tilted his head, but didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and touched the mirror beside her. His hand left no mark, but the glass glowed briefly beneath his palm. Then he turned and walked toward the window. Not to escape, to look. He stared out at the field she'd crossed, then up at the sky, and whispered something too soft to hear. When he turned back, he smiled and vanished. Evelyn didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply lowered herself into the old armchair, facing the mirror, and waited. For what? She didn't know. But it felt like the house would tell her when it was time. And as the sun moved across the sky, slipping through each window in turn, the light hit the bookshelf behind her. More books now, still not full, still ready, each with a title etched faintly on the spine. One glowed, just barely. She turned to look, her name, and beneath it a subtitle, "The Woman Who Stayed to Listen." It wasn't a warning, not anymore. This house wasn't haunted, it was holding space, for others, for stories. For people who had lived too long with silence as their only shelter. And Evelyn understood the role she'd taken on. Not as the final girl in a nightmare, not as the author of tragedy, but as the librarian of the truth. She would listen. She would hold the pages for others until they were ready to write their own. And maybe, just maybe, the knocking would stop. Not because the doors were sealed, but because someone had finally answered. The days didn't count themselves. They came in with the breeze and left with the moon, unmeasured, untallied, and most importantly, unfeared. Evelyn stopped marking time altogether, because, in this place, time no longer measured survival. It measured presence. The house didn't need to remind her of its rules, because she had written them. Not in ink, in action. And the house obeyed, not like a servant, more like a companion. It breathed with her now, steady and still, a rhythm finally in sync with its keeper. The shelves filled slowly, one book at a time. They didn't come with ceremony. There were no ghostly arrivals, no sudden knocks or twisted corridors, just visitors, people, strangers at first, some wide-eyed, others heavy-limbed, each one carrying a silence they had mistaken for safety. Some cried before stepping inside. Others couldn't speak at all. But the moment they passed through the threshold where a door used to be, they changed. Or rather, they softened. Evelyn welcomed them without question. No forms, no appointments, no diagnosis. She didn't need to know why they came. She only needed to make sure they could stay as long as they needed. The first guest was a man named Callum. Mid-50s, skin like smoked oak and eyes that seemed to blink too slowly, like they didn't trust what they were seeing. He sat on the porch for nearly a full day before finally stepping inside. He didn't say much, just looked around, sat in the corner, and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 20 years. He left behind a single page, tucked inside a book that hadn't existed before his visit. When Evelyn opened it, she didn't find a story. Just 3 words: "I was believed." Then came a girl, 13 maybe. She never gave her name. carried a cracked Polaroid in her shoe. Her hands shook when she touched the walls, like they might lash out at her. They didn't. The house only warmed beneath her fingers. She slept beneath the window, curled in a blanket Evelyn had found in the attic one morning, though she couldn't remember ever placing it there. The girl stayed 2 days. When she left, a new photo appeared in the mirror frame. Her, smiling, just slightly. Enough to matter. The house learned, just as Evelyn had. It no longer hid its memory in closets or tried to trick its guests into seeing their pain before they were ready. It waited, offered, reflected. And each time it was trusted, it expanded. Not in size, in depth. Like the more stories it held, the further it stretched inward, making more room for the ones still coming. But peace is rarely permanent. And on the 33rd day, something new arrived. Not a person, not a page, a shadow. No feet, no face, just presence. It moved at the edge of the property like a thought Evelyn didn't want to finish. It didn't ask to come in. It didn't knock. It just stood, watching. Evelyn did not fear it, not in the old way, but she recognized it. This wasn't the house's doing. This was something that had followed her. A piece of the old story, maybe. An echo of something she never dared name. That night the windows trembled, not violently, not even loudly, but in a rhythm, like breath, but not hers. She didn't wake with a start. She had stopped waking that way. Instead, she rose slowly, walked barefoot through the house, and stood in the open doorway where the front door used to be. The shadow was still there. Closer now, but still outside, and then it spoke, not aloud. Inside her, a voice she hadn't heard since the mirror room, the voice of the reflection. The archivist. You left me unfinished. Evelyn didn't answer. Because deep down, she knew it was right. She had forgiven herself. But she had not yet faced the version of her that wouldn't. Not every version wants peace. Some feed on punishment. Some need it. Some believe they are it. The shadow began to shape. A figure, female, same build, same hair, same face, just colder. This was the Evelyn who had never stopped running. The one who, even in healing, still held a knife behind her back. Not to hurt others, to hurt herself if the healing didn't work. Why did you leave me there? The shadow asked. Because I didn't think you wanted to come with me, Evelyn said. You didn't ask. That stopped her. The house held its breath. The shadow stepped forward, but could not pass through the threshold. Evelyn remembered now she had made a rule long ago. Even before naming the house, only truths could enter. And this Evelyn, this reflection, was not a lie, but she wasn't finished. You can't come in, Evelyn whispered. But you don't have to stay out there forever. What do I have to do? The shadow asked. Tell me something I didn't want to hear. The shadow hesitated, then spoke. You were relieved when Peter disappeared. You hated the guilt, but for one moment, you were relieved that it wasn't you. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't deny it. She didn't retreat. She simply nodded. Yes, she said. And I've carried that moment like it makes me unworthy of everything that came after. The shadow blinked and cried. One tear. Black. Heavy. It hit the ground outside the threshold and bloomed into a flower. A single white petal, soft as ash. Then the shadow dissolved. Not in drama. Not in violence, just gone. Evelyn stepped outside, picked the flower, brought it in, placed it on the mirror's frame, and for the first time, the glass smiled back, not her face, not her past, but the present honest. Forgiven, the house exhaled. A new book appeared on the shelf. Its spine read, The One Who Welcomed Even Her Worst Self. Evelyn sat by the window, watching the field. Another visitor was already approaching, and this time she felt ready, not to fix them, not to tell them what they were, but to listen, and maybe, if they were ready, show them the room inside themselves where the storm had already passed. It was the way the grass moved that caught her attention, bent not by wind, but by presence. Even before Evelyn saw the figure, she felt it. Not heavy, not dark, but quiet, The kind of quiet that wasn't silence, but something withheld. This one didn't announce itself. No knocking, no hesitation. Just steady steps toward the threshold where the door used to be. The house didn't groan, didn't tense. It waited, like it always did now. Like it had learned. She was standing in the kitchen when the figure crossed into view. Thin, average height, long coat frayed at the hem, no shoes. Face obscured by a wide, brimmed hat that didn't suit the season, or the moment. Evelyn tilted her head. The house stayed calm, but she didn't. Not quite. Something was off. When the figure stepped over the threshold, there was no shift in air pressure, no flare of emotion. Just one foot, then the other. Then a stillness that felt earned. They looked up, and Evelyn saw nothing. Not blankness, not shadow, just absence. The face was there, but her eyes refused to remember it even as she stared straight at it. No features held, no expression stuck. It was as if the guest's face was a mirror too cracked to ever hold an image. "Welcome," Evelyn said, cautiously. "You can sit anywhere." The guest didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. But it spoke. "I don't know my name." The voice was not male, not female. It wasn't mechanical either. It was familiar, like someone whispering through a dream you couldn't wake from. Evelyn stepped forward slowly, her bare feet brushing against the woven rug near the old table. "That's okay," she said. "Most people don't remember it when they first arrive." "No," the guest replied. "I never had one." That made her stop. Her breath hitched slightly, though she didn't let it show. The house remained still. No creaks, no flickers. But Evelyn felt something, interest. The house wasn't watching. It was listening. She tried again. "Why did you come here?" "To see if I was real," the guest said. "And to find the one who wrote me." Evelyn blinked once. "Hard. Wrote you?" she asked, carefully. "You think you're from a story?" The guest took a step toward the bookshelf. "I don't think," they said. "I know. I found your story once. In a mirror. In a scream. In the sound of glass refusing to break." Evelyn's knees weakened, but she didn't sit. "You're one of them," she said. "A shadow. A version. Left behind." "No," the guest whispered, finally turning fully toward her. "I'm not a version. I'm the gap between them." And that made the house shudder. Every window clattered, every book's spine tensed. Even the fireplace, long dormant, let out a single hiss of heat. The gap, she remembered now. In the mirror maze between reflections, there had been flickers. Frames she couldn't focus on. Pieces of herself she had skipped over because they were too shapeless to name. But shape or not, they had felt her. And something must have stayed. The guest walked to the center of the room and stood under the exposed beam, where the sun always touched at noon. "I have no pain," they said. "No joy. No regret. No name. I am everything you edited out to make the story make sense." Evelyn swallowed hard. She hadn't realized how tightly she still gripped the narrative she'd rebuilt. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know anything stayed." The guest's head tilted again. "You never asked." That echo, again. The same words the shadow version had used before disappearing. "You never asked." She stepped forward, hand extended, but didn't touch. "I'm asking now," she said. "What do you want?" The guest stared. For too long. Then finally answered, "I want to know if I'm allowed to exist." There it was. The question she had buried in every blank page. The fear that not all parts of her were worth keeping. That some fragments were too raw, too cruel, too shapeless to belong in the final version. And this guest wasn't a mistake. It was the embodiment of every omission. Evelyn lowered her hand and took a breath so full it felt like her lungs had been empty for years. "You don't need my permission," she said. "You already exist." The guest's coat rippled, though there was no wind. "And the others? They'll feel you," she said. "They might not understand. But the house remembers what it was before it had walls. Before it had a name. And so do I." The guest looked around. Their presence softened, not shrank, not faded, softened, like it was no longer trying to fit in, just choosing to stay visible. Then, slowly, they walked to the far wall where a window looked out at the hills. They knelt, pressed a hand to the floor, and whispered something into the wood. Evelyn didn't hear it, but the house did, because in the next second, a new book formed on the bottom shelf. Black cover, no title. She reached for it, opened the first page, and saw nothing, just a reflection, her own, but with the guest standing behind her, not haunting, witnessing. This wasn't a story to be told. It was a story to be held, closed, and kept. The guest stood, nodded once, and walked out. No door, no goodbye. Just steps into the grass. Evelyn didn't follow. She sat, stared at the new book, and knew not every truth has to be spoken, but it must never be forgotten. The nights had grown warmer, not in temperature, but in texture. The kind of warmth that sits just behind the skin, gentle, constant, present. Evelyn had stopped fearing the dark. It no longer pressed in with sharp corners or whispered names she wasn't ready to say. The darkness in the house had turned patient. It held space now instead of swallowing it. She still lit candles at dusk, out of habit more than need. And as the flame flickered across the shelves, filled with names and stories and truths, she felt something else settle into the bones of the house, trust. But trust was fragile, and like anything newly learned, it could still be tested. It began one night in early twilight, a scent, nothing sinister, just forgotten, like pine sap, wet leaves, rain that hadn't yet fallen. The smell didn't belong in the house, not anymore, not now. It belonged to a memory she had locked away in one of the far rooms of her mind, the kind that didn't get a shelf, but a box buried in dirt and denial. She stood cautiously as the scent thickened. Not in the air, but in her chest. It was inside her. Like the memory had never left, only waited for silence long enough to crawl forward. She turned toward the staircase, one that had never been there until tonight. The house had built it, or revealed it. It spiraled down, not up, and the air that curled up from it was cold and damp and deep. She didn't grab a lantern, didn't grab the candle. She just stepped down. Each stair creaked, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to remind her that she was entering a place the house hadn't shown in years, maybe ever. As she descended, the scent grew stronger. Not fall, not even sharp, just real stone. Old wood soaked in rain, the memory of a forest, trapped indoors. At the bottom, a door, painted gray, the kind of gray that tries not to be noticed. She reached for the knob and froze. Her hand wasn't her own. It was smaller, childlike. She looked down. Her fingers were pale, unscarred, and trembling. She blinked, and she was there, not just remembering, living. The gray door creaked open on its own. Beyond it, the forest. Not a vision of it. The actual forest. The one where Peter had disappeared. Where the old red door had first called to them. The trees stood in solemn lines, taller than she recalled, and the leaves above made a canopy that filtered all light into a green haze. And standing beneath them, back to her, was the boy in the red jacket. But something was different. He was older. Not the child she remembered abandoning. Not the ghost who had forgiven her. This version of Peter stood still as stone, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly upward, as if listening to something far away. She stepped forward. A branch snapped beneath her foot. And he spoke, not turning around. "I thought you'd buried me deeper than this." His voice was rougher than she expected. Older, dry like dead leaves. "I tried," she said softly. "Why now?" "Because you're still here. Not by choice." That stung. But it was fair. "Why haven't you left?" she asked. Peter slowly turned to face her, and Evelyn saw it. His face was her own. Not exactly, but enough. The same fear in the eyes. The same apology in the lips. The same silence. "I'm not Peter," he said. "I'm what you made of him." The forest around them shifted. Not physically, emotionally. Branches drooped. Light flickered like candlelight in a storm. "You needed a villain," he said. "Someone to wear the weight you wouldn't carry. You wrote me into your shame." She stepped back. But the forest pressed closer. "You were a child," he said. "You didn't understand what doors could do. But instead of learning, you locked me here. I didn't mean to. I know. But intention doesn't make a cage less real." The ground beneath her feet softened. She looked down. Mud, soft earth, like memory had become moss. Eager to pull her under, she reached out. Not to defend herself, to reach him. "I'm not here to write over you," she whispered. "I'm here to remember you right." The boy's face shifted again, not into hers, but into something new, something true. Not a copy, not a ghost, just a boy, scared, hurt, waiting too long for someone to come back. She stepped forward, arms wide. "I'm sorry I turned you into something you weren't." He hesitated, then stepped into her arms. And as she held him, the forest sighed. Not in relief, in release. The trees swayed, the mud dried, the light warmed, and Peter, the boy, the echo, the memory, faded from her arms like morning mist. She stood alone, but not abandoned, and this time the forest let her walk away, back through the door, up the stairs, back into the house that waited. When she reached the top, the gray door closed behind her. Locked not to hide, but to honor. A new book appeared on the shelf, thinner than the others. Its title read, "The Lie She Let Go." She touched the spine. It pulsed gently, not with pain, but with peace. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn didn't sit by the window. She didn't wait for the next visitor. She climbed into the old armchair and slept, unwatched, unhaunted, unburdened. It began with a sound. Not a creak, not a knock, not the low groan of memories stretching their limbs. It was softer, stranger, a note held too long in the still air, trembling just beneath the threshold of hearing. It wasn't coming from outside the house, nor from any of the rooms she had come to know like the lines of her palms. It came from within the walls. A song, familiar, though she couldn't say from where. The kind of tune that lives buried in the spine long after the ears have forgotten it. Evelyn stirred from sleep. The old armchair cradled her like an echo. Her eyes opened not with urgency, but with recognition. The song wasn't calling her. It was remembering her. As if it, too, had been trapped inside the house all this time, humming to itself in the dark, waiting for her to hear it. She didn't move at first, just listened. One note, then the next, then another, curling into the shape of something that used to be a lullaby, or maybe a warning. The melody didn't build. It hovered, like the house didn't dare let it land. Finally, Evelyn rose, slowly. Her bare feet touched the warm wooden floor, and the song grew clearer. No lyrics, just humming. The kind that leaks from the throat when the body's too tired to lie. It seemed to be following her, or perhaps guiding her, down the hallway, past the mirror, past the bookshelf, into a space she hadn't seen before. Not a new room, a hidden one, the kind that exists only when you stop looking for it. The door was already ajar. Behind it, a staircase wound downward in tight spirals. Not like the one that led to the forest memory. This was narrower, closer, like descending into a throat. And still the song continued. No louder, just closer, intimate. She took the first step, and the candle in her hand, unlit just seconds ago, flared to life. Not with flame, with glow. Not orange but blue. Like moonlight had been caught in wax and decided to burn. Each step downward felt like untying a knot in her chest. Not all at once. Slowly, with purpose, and the song kept time. By the time she reached the bottom, the air had grown colder. Not threatening, just honest. This was a place where lies couldn't breathe. The room wasn't wide. It barely had space for her to turn. But it held something impossible. A cradle, rocking, back and forth, empty. Yet the source of the song, not mechanical, not ghostly, just rocking, humming, existing. She approached, every nerve alive. Her fingers brushed the edge of the cradle, and the song stopped. Silence fell like snowfall, soft, sudden, complete. Then, a voice, from beneath the cradle. "You left me here when you chose to forget." The voice was hers, not current, not recent, a child's voice. Raw, high, pitched, accusing. I didn't know, she whispered. You didn't want to know, the voice snapped. So you built stories. You gave the pain prettier names. You turned the scream into song. Evelyn backed away, but the cradle rocked faster now. You put me in a poem and hoped I'd stay quiet, it said. You wrote about the trauma, but never let me speak it. The candlelight flickered. The walls began to breathe. The whole room felt like a lung ready to exhale a truth too long held. I'm listening now, Evelyn said, chest tight. I'm not trying to rewrite you anymore. The rocking slowed. The cradle stilled. And a single object appeared in it. Not a baby, a cassette tape. Old, worn. The label faded to near nothing, but one word remained scratched into the side of Maurar. Her breath caught. She hadn't thought of her mother in years. Not really. Not the woman, only the role, the gaps, the silence. Her hands shook as she picked up the tape. The room shifted. A player appeared on a small table in the corner, dusty, ancient. Waiting, she slid the tape inside, pressed play, and for a moment, nothing. Then, breathing, heavy, then her mother's voice. Reading, not poetry, not stories, a letter. To the daughter I couldn't touch, Evelyn dropped to her knees. The voice continued, raw, unfinished, unsent, a confession, of fear, of shame, of distance. Her mother, naming the exact moment she realized she didn't know how to raise a child that reminded her too much of her own scars. The way she'd closed every door to keep herself from seeing what Evelyn carried. The apology she had never spoken, because her pride had been louder than her regret. By the time the tape clicked to its end, Evelyn's face was wet with tears. Not grief, recognition. The cradle stopped rocking. The air stopped moving, but in her chest, something settled. The house had never held that room before. It had waited for her to unlock it. Because not all pain comes from trauma. Some comes from the truths we never get to hear. She stood, gently placed the tape back into the cradle, and kissed the edge of the wood. A thank you, not to the house, to herself, for coming back. As she climbed the stairs, the song did not return. But the silence it left behind was earned. When she emerged into the main hall again, a new book had formed. This one wasn't on the shelf. It rested on the floor beside the cradle in her memory. But its title echoed now across every wall, The Child Who Waited to Be Heard. And Evelyn whispered into the house, into the candlelight, into herself, I hear you now. The day began with sunlight. Not the cautious light of early dawn, but full, bold rays that spilled through every window in the house like a tide unchecked. The house soaked it in, board by board, its walls no longer clenched in defense but basking, opening, receiving. Evelyn stood in the doorway where no door had ever returned, coffee cradled in her hands, watching the field outside sway like a sea of gold. Peace had learned how to linger here, not as an accident, but as a choice. The house had earned it. She had earned it. But peace, like all things real, doesn't come without a price, and sometimes it arrives with a knock that doesn't land on wood, but inside your chest. It wasn't a sound this time. It was a shift, a moment that tasted off in the mouth of a perfect morning. Birdsong stopped, wind paused, time winced. She knew it before she saw anything. Something was coming. Not a person, not a guest, not even a memory, but a force, a will. Something that had watched from afar for too long and finally decided the house had grown too bold. Something old, but not from her. Not conjured by guilt or shame or regret. This didn't belong to her story. This was someone else's storm. It walked up the hill in broad daylight. Tall, thin. Its shadow fell wrong, bending backward while it stepped forward. Its face was covered, wrapped in cloth like a mourning veil soaked in ash. No hands, only black sleeves that seemed to stretch with every step it took. It didn't run. It didn't creep. It approached, confident, relentless. The house began to tremble. Not with fear. With remembrance. Evelyn heard the groan in the ceiling, the murmur in the floor. The house knew this presence. It had felt it before. Perhaps not here, but somewhere. in some story never finished, in some whisper left out of the books on the shelves. Evelyn stepped outside to meet it. She didn't wait inside like the girl she used to be. She walked barefoot through the field, the stalks brushing her legs, until she stood just a few feet from the thing that wasn't human and had never pretended to be. Its head tilted, once, and the cloth over its face shifted. Though no mouth formed, no eyes blinked. "You've let them grow," it said. The voice didn't pass through air. It arrived, direct, internal, a statement that crawled under her ribs and sat behind her lungs. "I gave them a place," Evelyn replied. Her voice didn't shake. "You gave them hope," it said. "And now they forget who I am." "You're not forgotten," she said. "You're just not worshipped." The thing's body curled forward, not in pain, in focus. "I was here before the stories," it whispered. "Before the names. Before even the knocking." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I know. And yet you built this place. A temple to healing. A shrine to closure." She stepped forward. "It's not a shrine," she said. "It's a sanctuary." "No," it hissed. "It's a prison with better manners." The field around them darkened. Not from clouds. From memory. The house behind her flickered in shape. Its roof sagged for a second. Its windows cracked. The mirror groaned. The bookshelf hissed. The creature wasn't just threatening the house. It was remembering it into submission. Every visitor who had ever left a truth here had carved light into the walls. And now this thing was trying to suck that light back out, to reclaim the house's pain for itself. "You can't undo what's been lived," Evelyn said, stepping between the creature and the threshold. "I can remind them," it said, "of what they were before you softened them." The ground split behind the creature. A black seam tore open across the field. From it whispers, screams, laughter twisted into sobs, raw story unshaped and cruel, every unspoken truth clawing to rise. And still, Evelyn did not run. "You need them to believe you're the end," she said quietly. "But you're not. You're just a middle that stayed too long." That stopped the creature cold. It didn't know how to respond. And that silence gave the house its opening. The windows flashed, not with light, with faces. Dozens, hundreds, every guest who had ever come through, not as victims, not as wounded souls, as witnesses, one by one. They appeared, hands pressed against the panes, watching not in fear, but in unity. They stood with Evelyn, not to fight, to refuse to forget the safety she had given them, the stories she had held. The house trembled again, but this time in power. The mirror at the center of the room turned to glass again. The bookshelf began to hum, and the floor beneath Evelyn glowed with the words of every story that had been spoken within its walls. The creature hissed. "You can't hold them forever," it growled. "Their pain belongs to me." Evelyn took a breath so deep it pulled memory, courage, and sorrow together into a single exhale. "No," she said, "it belongs to them. You're just the voice that shows up before they learn how to speak." The creature shrieked, not in rage but in fear, because it knew what came next. The field began to bloom. Wildflowers erupted from the seams in the soil. The sky turned violet. The house gleamed as if polished by memory itself. And the thing, this storm that walked on two legs, began to fade. It tried to clutch the air, tried to dig its sleeves into the dirt, but it could not hold what had already been let go. Evelyn turned her back on it, walked up the hill, step by step, as the last trace of it dissolved into wind. And when she crossed the threshold again, the house sang, not loudly, not musically, but in wholeness, a vibration through every beam, every window pane, every book spine. And on the floor where she had once fallen to her knees, a new book waited. Its title gleamed, The Day the Past Knocked Too Late. She picked it up, held it to her chest. And for the first time, she whispered, "Let the storm find somewhere else to go." There was a stillness in the house now that felt final. Not an ending, but the deep breath taken before something important begins. The kind of quiet found in libraries just before closing, when the last patron lingers in the back, reluctant to leave what they've found. Evelyn moved through the rooms without candles. She didn't need them. The light had learned her shape. It followed her like a memory too soft to be called haunting. Nothing flickered. Nothing creaked. The house was resting. But it was not asleep. In the hallway near the mirror, a door had appeared. She hadn't seen it before, not when the storm came. Not when the visitors left. It had no knob, no hinge. Just a rectangle of wood carved into the wall like a scar that had healed beautifully, but refused to fade. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers hovering over the outline, afraid to touch. Not from fear, but from understanding. Some things don't open until you're ready to know you're never going back. Then it opened, on its own. No wind, no sound, just a slow shift inward. And behind it her name. Not on a paper, not on a plaque. Written in the air. Letters drifted like smoke and starlight across the room, curling around her before dissolving into her skin. The room was empty, no furniture, no shelves, not even a window. Just walls painted the exact color of her childhood bedroom. That soft off, white that had never been bright, never truly clean, always just enough to feel real. And on the far side, a single drawing taped to the wall, a stick figure with a red crayon smile and hands too big, standing next to a tiny house with a cracked roof. Her first drawing. The one she had made when she was 5 and told her mother she wanted to live in a house that always said sorry when it creaked. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her, but it wasn't trapping her, it was welcoming her. This was the room the house had kept from her, not out of malice, out of respect. It had waited for her to return not as a stranger to her story, but as its author. In the center of the room, the floor rippled once, not water, not illusion. Memory a soft rise and fall like breath against wooden lungs, and then a voice, her own, small, high, 5 years old. I didn't mean to be loud. The sentence knocked the wind from her. She remembered it. The night she'd cried too long and her mother had snapped, told her to hush, that no one liked a girl who always made noise. She hadn't cried loudly since. Hadn't spoken loudly since. Not until this house. I was just scared, her younger voice whispered. But I don't think anyone heard me. Evelyn dropped to her knees and answered the echo. I hear you now. The walls sighed. The drawing detached from the wall, floated gently to her feet and transformed. Not into paper, but into pages. A book, slim, handmade. The kind you bind with yarn in press school. She picked it up. Inside only one sentence. Written in wobbly pencil, I want to be real even when I cry. And there it was. The origin. The first secret. The seed that had grown into every silence she'd ever worn like armor. She held the book to her chest and wept. Not in grief, not in shame, but in relief, because she could cry now, and the house would not hush her. When she stood again, the room had changed. Not completely, just enough. The walls breathed deeper. The floor steadied, and a new object sat where the drawing had once been, a small music box. Unmarked, unopened. She turned the tiny key on its side. It played a song. The same one that had bled through the walls that night. The lullaby, the ache, the whisper of a mother who had never quite known how to say, I love you, without fear curling behind it. But this time, the melody finished, and when it ended, the silence left behind wasn't heavy. It was earned. Evelyn placed the music box beside the tiny handmade book and walked to the door. It opened for her. The hallway beyond was brighter. The mirror, clearer. The house knew. This was not her first return, but it would be her last visit. Because now, she was not just someone the house had held. She was someone who had finished her room. As she walked past the shelves, one book slid forward, as if nudged by an unseen hand. She looked. Its title shimmered. The girl who learned her own name meant everything. And Evelyn finally whispered it out loud. Not the name on her birth certificate. Not the one her mother gave her. Not the ones others had wrapped around her like bandages or threats. But the name she had never dared to speak until now. the one only the house had waited to hear. I am whole. The walls didn't echo it. They held it. And the house, quiet, sturdy, alive, stood a little taller. There are doors you walk through, and there are doors that walk through you. This one had no frame, no knob, no hinges. It appeared not with sound, but with certainty, like the closing sentence of a story that had taken too long to write. Evelyn found it not in the hallway, not in the attic, not behind some newly forged illusion. It waited for her in the quietest place in the house, the space between her breath and the floor, between the closing of her eyes and the settling of dust. She hadn't seen it before because it wasn't meant to be seen. It was meant to be felt. It hovered just past the bookshelf, across from the mirror that now reflected her fully. Not a fragment, not a softened version, but her. Everything she was. Everything she had ever carried, left behind, forgiven, reshaped. She approached the door with no hesitation, not because she was fearless, but because, at last, she understood the shape of her own story. And it was not ending. It was continuing, but not here. The house had grown quiet with love. It no longer needed to protect her. Its walls no longer whispered warnings or moaned under the weight of truths too old to echo. It had given her every room she needed, every visitor, every version of herself worth reclaiming. And now it gave her this, the final space, the room beyond all the others. She stepped through the threshold, and instead of finding a room, she found everyone, not in form, in presence. The guests who had once arrived barefoot and broken, the versions of herself who had asked questions no one else had the courage to answer. The echoes, the shadows, the child who had begged to be heard. They were not waiting for her, they were with her, part of her. Nothing left behind. The room was not a place, it was a knowing. A culmination of every door she'd opened, and every door she hadn't dared to. A realm of stillness that didn't ask for silence, but for presence. It didn't test her. It didn't twist her. It simply welcomed her. The house itself stood beside her, not as structure, but as memory. Its windows no longer needed to reflect. Its floors no longer needed to remember where the screams had landed. It had done its work, and so had she. There was no pain in this parting. No sharpness. Only warmth. Evelyn placed one hand on her chest and the other against the space where the door had disappeared. I was never meant to stay here, she said, only to remember what it meant to be safe long enough to leave. The house pulsed. A heartbeat. Then, all at once, it began to fade, not collapse, not burn, not shatter, but release itself. The way a tide retreats from the shore once it knows the footprints have been set. Books dissolved into stardust. Walls sighed into light. The mirror gave one final image, her as she had been the day she arrived, and her as she now stood, side by side. The past didn't vanish, it simply stepped back and nodded. The house was not lost, it was finished. And Evelyn, she walked forward into the space beyond stories, not into heaven, not into some grand rebirth, just forward, whole, seen, no longer a keeper of rooms, but a builder of new ones. She would make more sanctuaries, not of walls but of words, not of doors but of open arms, and wherever someone whispered the kind of truth they thought was too ugly to be loved, her story would rise beside them like a quiet companion, reminding them you can survive, you can stay, you can go, you can return. But most of all, you are not alone. Back on the hill, where the house once stood, wildflowers grew in the shape of a foundation, not planned, not perfect, but true. And when the wind blew just right, it carried the softest echo, not a scream, not a sob, but a name, one that had learned, finally, to speak itself aloud, Evelyn. And the silence answered, "Welcome home."